Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to our program tonight. For the 15th of Sha'ban, we've done different types of programs, but we've tried to expand the time allocated to these days, given the importance that the Imam plays in our lives. If I had remembered my usul al-kafi, which I left at home, I would have the exact hadith, so I'll ask the ulama to correct me if I'm wrong. But in the book of divine proof, there is so many ahadith that specifically say that the world cannot exist without the Imam, and that his role is so central that Allah would not leave even for one day. He wouldn't leave. Even if there were two people left in the world, there would only be one of them would be the Imam. So the Imam's role in our life is so important, and it's so central to the religion, and the hujjah of Allah is so central that we understand this concept and we remember it. But part of that is building that relationship with our present Imam, and that is a bigger challenge because he is in ghaibah, because we don't benefit from his presence like previous generations did when they had the Imam presence. And so that leads to so many questions, it leads to so many sometimes confusions, concerns around that. And so that's why we felt it's important to have these days and programs that can really go into it in depth. And so this year we are blessed to have Hujjatul Islam Sayyid Sulayman Abidi and Hujjatul Islam Shayk Rizwan Arastu, who will be talking and leading this symposium on Mahdawiyyah. We have several topics that they will discuss, and we will have time for question and answer. So it will be an interactive session. We'll have their presentations first, and then we will leave ample time for the question and answer in the last half of each session. We are breaking this program up into two sessions. So the first session is starting shortly. It will have two presentations and then question and answer, and then we'll take a short break and start the second session as well. And then we will conclude with Maghrib and Isha prayer and have dinner downstairs. And then we will also have A'mal for the 15th, the night of the 15th of Sha'ban, later tonight at 7:30 p.m. Insha'Allah. To begin the program, I will ask Brother Abdullah to come and recite Surah Insan. Please welcome him with a loud salawat. Allah.
صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا. إنا هديناه السبيل إما شاكرا وإما كفورا. إنا أعتدنا للكافرين سلاسل وأغلالا وسعيرا. إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كفورا. عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا. يوفون بالنذر ويخافوا يوما كان شره مستطيرا. ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا. إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. إنا نخاف من ربنا يوما عبوسا قمطريرا. فوقاهم الله شر ذلك اليوم ولقاهم نضرة وسرورا. وجزاهم بما صبروا جنة وحريرا متكئين فيها على الأرائك لا يرون في شمسا ولا زمهريرا ودانية عليهم ظلالها وظللت قطوفها تذليلا ويطاف عليهم بآنية من فضة وأكواب كانت قوارير من فضة قدروها تقديرا ويسقون فيها كأسا كان مزاجها زنجيلا عينا فيها تسمى سلسبيلا ويطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون إذا رأيتهم حسبتهم لؤلؤا منثورا وإذا رأيت ثم رأيت نعيما وملكا كبيرا عاليهم ثياب سندس خضر واستبرق وهلوا أصاور من فضة وسقاهم ربهم شرابا طهورا إن هذا كان لكم جزاء وكان سعيكم مشكورا إنا نحن نزلنا عليك القرآن تنزيلا فاصبر لحكم ربك ولا تطع منهم آثما وأكفورا واذكر اسم ربك بكرة وأصيلا ومن الليل فاسجد له وسبحه ليلا طويلا إن هؤلاء يحبون العاجلة ويذرون وراءهم يوما ثقيلا نحن خلقناهم وشددنا أسرهم وإذا شئنا بدلنا أمثالهم تبديلا إن هذه تذكرة فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما يدخل من يشاء في رحمته والظالمين أعد لهم عذابا أليما صدق الله العلي العظيم.
MashaAllah, for Abdullah's health, well-being, and continued blessings, and for his family's continued health and well-being, please recite a very loud salawat. So we will now start our sessions. And the first presentation will be by Sayyid Sulayman. And his topic is the signs of the end of times. So please welcome him with a loud salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Mubarak to all of you on this occasion of the 15th of Sha'ban and the birth of the final proof of Allah, the heir of our Prophet and all of the Prophets and all of the Imams and that is the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajah. Sallu ala Muhammad. Inshallah, we will be able to gain a little bit of a better understanding of our belief in the Imam and our relationship to the Imam through the presentations and the discussion and question-answer period that we will have today. And that is one of our obligations when Allah has given us a gift through Ahlul Bayt and a promise which has inspired the greatest hope throughout human history, and that is for the eradication of evil and injustice, for the spread of illumination and guidance, not just for certain individuals, but for all who are seeking and desirous of guidance and of enlightenment. Then the very least that we can do to show our gratitude and our recognition of the greatness of that gift is to try to learn more about what God's promise is and who the individual that is the manifestation and the representative of that promise is. And we will look at several different aspects of Imam Mahdi and our relationship to him. In this presentation, I want to look a little bit at some of the signs of the end times. And this is one of those exciting topics that has animated people in both their religiosity and also even in broader culture, literature, media, and entertainment. You'll find that it's not just the followers of Ahlul Bayt and the Shia, but even the broader Muslim community will have a curiosity about the signs of the end times, al-fitan wal-malahim, as they are sometimes called, the tests and tribulations and wars that will take place at the end time, the signs of the appearance of Imam Mahdi, who is awaited by all Muslims, Sunni and Shia, although there are varying levels of recognition of who that Imam and who that promised figure is. And also the signs of the Day of Judgment, which, as we will see, are not entirely separate from the signs of the appearance of Imam Mahdi. And then more broadly, even members of other religious communities are awaiting either the return of whom we would refer to as the Masih Isa ibn Maryam and a messenger of Allah, or an awaited Messiah or a Savior, although there are differences in the details, but the expectation and the awaiting of a promise by Allah in the end of times, that is something that is it's found across many different religions, and we can say it is actually universal, and it is a part of the human fitrah and our created soul and the very fabric of our being, to have hope and expectation with respect to the future that is placed there in our hearts by Allah for a very sublime purpose. But sometimes that gets translated to a desire to kind of predict and to get ahead of the game by knowing how far away is this promise from being fulfilled. And although the belief is a universal belief, and it is a very sublime and it is a very important part of what sustains our faith, it is entirely possible for it to misfire and become destructive and damaging to our religiosity and to our practice and even to our connection to our faith. Sometimes it can set people up for superstition, for believing in false claimants to that role of being God's promised Savior. Sometimes it can set a person up for psychological or emotional or behavioral problems. For example, if I go to an extreme in expectation and awaiting, and then because I went to one extreme, when that zeal is not fulfilled, then I may become despondent, or I may lose hope, or I may have an equal and opposite reaction after time. So it's very important for us to value the expectation and the promise in God's awaited Savior, God's appointed Savior, but also to do so in a way that is in accordance with the teachings of our religion and in a way that will sustain and strengthen our faith rather than lead us down perhaps a non-constructive or even a destructive path. And the first thing that we can observe is that when it comes to the Quran tells us more about the signs that will be there after the appearance of Imam Mahdi than it tells us about those signs that will be there just before the appearance of the Imam. Most of the signs that we normally think of as ala'im al-dhuhur, the signs of the appearance of the Imam, they are found in ahadith, in sayings of the Prophet and of the Imams. But when it comes to the Quran, we find not any kind of specific mention of some of those elements which are found in the Christian scripture, in the New Testament, in Matthew, or in the book of Revelations, or those signs that are found in our ahadith of wars and pestilence and other trials that will exist. What does the Quran tell us? The Quran gives us, for example, in Surah As-Saff, verse number 8, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. They wish to extinguish the light of Allah with their tongues, but Allah will complete His light, even though the unbelievers are averse to it. And then in the very next verse of Surah As-Saff, a message which is also repeated in Surah At-Tawbah in the exact same words, هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. In the previous verse, it is the unbelievers that are averse, and in this verse, the Quran mentions the polytheists, even though they may be averse, Allah sent His Prophet, His Messenger, with guidance and with the true religion, the true law, لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ, in order for it to triumph over all religion, over all systems of law and governance and all ideologies, and to triumph in the world. So both of these messages, they speak of mutimmu nurih, the completion of God's light, liyudhhirahu ala ad-din kullih, the triumph of religion over all, the true religion over all religion. These are signs that apply to the fulfillment of the message of Imam Mahdi, the culmination of the mission of our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And that promise is repeated in other verses, just a few examples, although there are many verses that we could cite. One is in Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 105. Allah mentions a promise that was made in the Psalms of Dawood in Zabur. وَلَقَدْ كَتَبْنَا فِي الزَّبُورِ مِنْ بَعْدِ الذِّكْرِ أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحُونَ. We have written in the Zabur, after the remembrance or the dhikr, that the earth shall be inherited by God's righteous servants. And the promise mentioned in Surah Al-Qasas, verse number 5, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَّمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. We wish to show a favor to those who were deemed weak in the earth, and to make them imams, and to make them the heirs. Now, just one point about this verse: there are two promises that are being given to those who were deemed weak. One is that they will be leaders and imams, and one is that they will be heirs. But one of these promises is made with a common noun without the definite article, and the other is with a definite noun with the definite article alif lam in Arabic. وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً, to make them leaders, not the leaders, but leaders. And then وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ الْوَارِثِينَ, to make them the heirs, which is definite. And perhaps the reason for this is that imams have existed throughout history. The prophets of Allah that led their communities were imams. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was an imam. Prophet Musa alayhi salam was an imam. Our prophet was a prophet and an imam because he brought a revelation and he led his ummah to the implementation of that revelation, and he was succeeded by imams who were not prophets. So the system of imamat that has been continuous throughout history, and the people in the last days will not be the only ones who are leaders. They will be leaders, they will be imams in that line of imamat. But when the Quran says, وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ الْوَارِثِينَ, we want to make them the heirs. That implies that there will be nobody else who will inherit any part of the earth. They will be exclusively the heirs of the entire earth. And that is another indication of the universality of the triumph of Islam. That they shall, the believers, the righteous, the ones who were deemed weak, they shall be the only heirs of the entirety of the earth. لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ, that Allah will complete His light, وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ, and that the believers, the righteous, those who were deemed weak, shall be the heirs of the entire world. All of them, they are indicating a similar reality, which can only be fulfilled if there is an infallible imam and a guide that is the leader of the Muslims. Because the complete eradication of misguidance and evil, the complete inheritance of the entire earth by the righteous who were deemed weak, not because of a military strength, but because of the power that they received through their faith and through their following the true imam. That is only possible if that imam, and therefore the mission that he leads, does not have any guesswork or any error or any deficiency within it, that it is perfect and it is unerring and it is complete. So these verses and other verses of the Quran, they are a promise of the signs that will become manifest after Imam Mahdi comes. But then, why would it be that the Quran does not tell us how to predict what will be the signs of the coming of the Imam? Especially when we realize that some of those signs were mentioned in previous scriptures, Some of them, maybe not in perfect form, but in a partial or in a deficient form, are preserved even today in the remnants of those scriptures or the traditions that are found by previous religious communities. And some of them are preserved in the oral tradition from other religions or in the narrations and the ahadith from the Prophet and from the Imams. Why would the Quran focus on the fulfillment of the mission but not the signs that will allow us to see when it is imminent and when it is about to take place? That gives us a hint about what the role of those ahadith and those signs that are mentioned is and what that role is not. Now, before we talk about what that role is, just one completion. There is a hint in the Quran about the situation of the Muslims before the fulfillment of this promise. Although the Quran speaks much more comprehensively, much more frequently and inspiringly of what will take place upon the fruition of the mission of Imam Mahdi than it speaks about the state of the Muslims in the immediately prior time. We do find in Surah Al-Mulk, at the end of Surah Al-Mulk, verse number 30, قُلْ إِنْ رَأَيْتُمْ إِنْ أَصْبَحَ مَاؤُكُمْ غَوْرًا فَمَنْ يَأْتِيكُمْ بِمَاءٍ مَعِينٍ. If your spring of water, if it goes dry, your well goes dry, who will then bring you pleasant water to drink at that stage? And that is not just a literal message about the water table going down and you having to dig deeper wells or truck in water from another source, but a hint for us of what happens to humanity when you don't have a well of connection to the pure water of divine revelation. When your well goes dry means when you don't have access to the Prophet or to the Ma'soom. And that will be the state of the believers in the era of the concealment, the ghaibah of our Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. And then we're not going to have a consultative assembly, a constituent assembly, or an election, or a modern day saqifa in order to choose another caliph. We've tried that once as a Muslim ummah, and that was well more than was needed. فَمَنْ يَأْتِيكُمْ بِمَاءٍ مَعِينٍ. Who will then bring you back that pure water that you need? That will be Allah. So this is not a detailed sign, but it is a reflection of the state of the believers in the period of the concealment of the Imam. And in Surah An-Naba, Allah says, عَمَّ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ. What is it that people are talking about and asking about? What is that news or that great news? They are talking about عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ. That about which people differ. Now, sometimes commentaries will tell you that is referring to the Day of Judgment. And that's not wrong, but the Day of Judgment is not just that final day, but all of those events that lead to the culmination of the story of humanity on this earth, and that lead to the beginning of the Akhirah. And a major part of that story and that culmination of humans' life on this earth is the fulfillment of God's promise to the Prophet and to Ahlul Bayt through imamat, through that leadership that is guided by Allah to bring to a fruition what the Prophet began. And that is why we have a hadith that this An-Naba'ul Azim is referring to wilaya or referring to imama. or referring to Imam Ali, or referring to the role of the Imams in the establishment of Islam and the triumph of Deenul Haq over all religion. So we do see some signs that hint indirectly at the state of the believers before the triumph of the mission of Imam Mahdi, or that process of awaiting, after our well has gone dry, the replenishment of that well. So now, what are the reasons why the Quran may have done this? Why speak so cryptically or so indirectly about something that is so relevant and that creates such a great curiosity? That the Quran will say, "Amma yatasa'alun." What is it that people are talking about and asking about? And if you know the history of apocalyptic beliefs in the Near East, in the Christian and Jewish communities, and messianic movements and cults in the centuries before the advent of Islam, then you can see exactly what that Amma yatasa'alun is referring to. It's not just about the Day of Judgment, but it is about the messianic expectations, the apocalyptic expectations that believers had. Well, coming to the signs, the first point to remember is that the signs that are mentioned are not meant to be predictive. They're not revealed or designed for you to be able to calculate when the appearance of the Imam is going to take place. So don't think that, one day you'll take a few months off of work, you'll collect all of the ahadith, you'll see how you can correspond that, this one says it's going to be a Friday, and this one says that it's going to be an odd year, and this one says that there's going to be an eclipse, and I'm going to look at astronomical tables, and I'm going to see how technology has matched up, and I'm going to try to calculate that these are the potential years, or this is the likely year when the promise that Allah has made is going to take place. We see from the focus of the Quran that there is a direction the Quran wants us to give our attention to. What is God's promise? And what will be the state of the believers on the eve of that promise? That you're waiting the replenishment of your well. And many ahadith tell us that the signs that are mentioned are not meant to be predictive. In one hadith, a companion of our sixth Imam by the name of Mihzam comes to the Imam. He says that جُعِلْتُ فِدَاكَ أَخْبِرْنِي عَنْ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ الَّذِي نَنْتَظِرُهُ مَتَى هُوَ. May I be your ransom. Tell me about this affair that we are awaiting. And if you fervently wait something, then you look at your watch every minute because you are enthusiastic and excited, and you are fervently waiting. And that fervency, that zeal was cultivated by Ahlul Bayt, but then it was meant to be disciplined and not just something that is spontaneous or impulsive. It was meant to be wise and disciplined. So when a person comes to the Imam, maybe with the overflow of that zeal, and says, when is it going to take place? The Imam says, Ya Mihzam, kadhab al-waqatun. Those who set a time, they are lying. وَهَلَكَ الْمُسْتَعْجِلُونَ. And those who are trying to rush it, they will be destroyed. Now, musta'jilun comes from the same root as ta'jil. And ta'jil is something that we pray for. We always say to Allah, وَعَجِّلْ فَرَجَهُمْ. Oh Allah, hasten their reappearance. So how on the one hand is the hastening something we pray for? And on the other hand, the Imam is saying, وَهَلَكَ الْمُسْتَعْجِلُونَ. That those who rush it will be annihilated. And ulama have explained that there is a prayer for God to hasten it because we know that that is what we need. That is our greatest haja, or our greatest ask, our greatest need from Allah. And then there is another thing to try to rush it on our terms. Let me kind of take a shortcut. Let me set something in motion. Let me perhaps make a demand on Allah, or even become angry that Allah is not doing things according to my timetable. That is isti'jab. And it might seem like a fine line, but it is a crucial distinction between praying to Allah that it is in your hands, and oh Allah, I pray that you make it immediate, that you make it today, even before tomorrow, and between saying that, oh Allah, I demand this from you, or oh Allah, I object to the fact that you have waited so long and that you are still delaying it, even if I may be impatient. وَنَجَى الْمُسَلِّمُونَ. And then finally, the Imam says that the only ones who are going to be saved are those who submit and are entirely at peace with the decree and the command of Allah. So if the signs are not meant to be predictive, and what are they meant to do? Well, they are meant to have a psychological and a spiritual effect on the believers. Certain signs are mentioned. And one of the purposes is that they condition us and they affect what emotions we feel and how we express those emotions and what our psychology becomes. In the first place, it makes us want to prepare. It gives us a sense of urgency and a connection to God's promise. And it keeps hope alive. This is reflected in a hadith which is narrated from our seventh Imam, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far alayhi as-salam. Narrated in Al-Kafi, also narrated by Shaykh al-Tusi in his book Al-Ghayba. The seventh Imam is reported to have said that Ya Ali inna Shi'a turabba bil amani mundhu mi'atay sana. The Shia are being raised and are being trained and are being nourished, if we can speak in a figurative sense, with hope for 200 years. Now, of course, if this was said in the last years of the life of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, it would be less than 200 years from the death of the Prophet. But ulama have said that this may not be referring to 200 years from the Hijrah, but 200 years from the beginning of the Prophet's mission. Because it was from the beginning of the Bi'thah, from the mission of the Prophet, when this promise and this expectation began. The Prophet himself has said that I have been sent just like two joined fingers between me and the day of judgment. And so if we count from the bi'thah of the Prophet, then it's not even a figurative time, it is about 200 years. So for 2 centuries, that was in the time of our seventh Imam, and today we would say from 14 centuries, hope is being kept alive through this promise, and the promise that it is near and that it is imminent. And the signs, they help us feel that imminence. Even though we as human beings, if you tell me that there is a place 10,000 miles away, I think it is very far, because that's the human scale. And yet if I were to zoom out, not just 10,000 miles away in Earth, but the entire length and breadth of the solar system is insignificant within creation. 200 years or 1,400 years seems like a long time by my reckoning, because I have that limited human scale where a mile is a long distance to walk, a year is a long time to wait. But it is nothing in the eyes of Allah. So to help bridge that gap, to help us see things from a different horizon, we have signs that are mentioned which give us amani, which give us hope, which make us feel a connection to events and to the effect of those events on the fulfillment of God's promise. So that effect is desired and is designed by Allah within the ahadith that talk about the signs of the reappearance. but not for us to then translate that to our time scale and say it's 5 years from now, or it's 10 years from now, or if it doesn't happen within 10 years, then I'm going to check out and say that this is not worth waiting for or giving importance to. Another thing that is mentioned by scholars is that these signs are one way to honor Imam Mahdi. When something is important, you give people advance notice. You tell people, save the date. You tell them this is going to come. You give a teaser or a advance inkling of what is about to come. And that is in proportion to how great or how significant an event is. That's not meant to predict, but it's meant to give you a reminder that this is not just an everyday event, a run-of-the-mill event that is taking place. This is something significant. This is the wedding. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. And here we have not once in a lifetime, but once in the lifetime of humanity itself. And finally, one of the reasons is to strike fear into the enemies of Islam, to give them a warning and to give them a chance to repent. So these signs, they also are a source of hope for believers and a source of warning for the unbelievers. So with that understanding of what the reason for these signs is, what are some of the signs? This introduction was more important than an actual list, because that's the easy part, to read an article and say, all right, this is one sign, that's another sign. And when we look at some of these signs, we'll see that there is not a whole lot that we can say definitively or conclusively about when and how they will take place or in what order. But just so that we have addressed that part of the topic and the question, there are some signs that are signs of the end times, not necessarily signs of the imminence of the appearance of Imam Mahdi, but they are related to that as well. One very famous sign is a hadith mentioned by Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, narrated from the Prophet, that says a time will come, لَمْ تَأْمُرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَمْ تَنْهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, when you will not engage in enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil. And people, they didn't believe that because they were in the early days of Islam when people had sincerity and energy. They said that, وَيَكُونُ ذَلِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ, is the time going to come when people are not going to fulfill that obligation? And the Prophet said that, yes, and even worse than that, نعم وشر من ذلك كيف بكم إذا أمرتم بالمنكر ونهيتم عن المعروف. What will be your state when you will enjoin what is evil and you will forbid what is good? And that is kind of when we think that something that is good, oh, that means that you are throwing away your life, you're throwing away your money, you're foolish by devoting your time, by donating your money, by giving your life to religion. That modesty is seen as a bad trait. That person might be called a loser. And then things that are haram, they are fun, they are enjoyable, they are culture. And so you have nahi anil ma'ruf, amr bil munkar. And people didn't believe that was going to take place. قِيلَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَيَكُونُ ذَلِكَ, this is going to happen. And the Prophet said, نَعَمْ وَشَرٌ مِّن ذَلِكَ كَيْفَ بِكُمْ إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْمَعْرُوفَ مُنْكَرًا وَالْمُنْكَرَ مَعْرُوفًا. After having enjoined what is evil, eventually you will come to a place where you think that evil is good. Your values will be exactly inverted, and we can see that in the society around us. And what you think is evil, that will be what is good. That will be what will bring you salvation, what will bring you inner peace and tranquility, the very thing that you think is not worthy. So this is not a sign of the imminence of the appearance of Imam Mahdi, but it is a sign of the end times. And other signs that are mentioned in a hadith are the wide spread of oppression, the hollowness or the emptiness of people's religious practice, in a hadith attributed to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. that a time will come when لا يبقى من القرآن إلا رسمه, the Quran will only be written very beautifully, maybe with great embellishment, but that is all that will be there of the Quran, and the heart of it will not remain. ولا من الإسلام إلا اسمه, people will be nominally Muslims, but not with the heart and the soul of a Muslim. يسمون به وهم أبعد الناس منه. They will be called Muslims, but they won't be actually close to it. They'll be the furthest thing from it. And that there will be frequent wars in which many people will be killed. So these are general signs of the end times. Then there are certain signs which are signs of the imminence of the appearance of the Imam. And these are of two types. One is those signs that are not definitive, they are conditional. So they're mentioned by the Imams, but they depend on what decisions individuals and societies make. If we make bad decisions, then these signs may come to pass, and if we make good decisions, then we may avert some of the suffering and some of the trials that have been foretold. It's a choose your own adventure, and that is what Bada refers to, that Allah changes our destiny based on our sincerity and our actions. Sometimes these are called غير محتوم or mashrut signs, conditional signs, non-definitive signs. Among the signs that are mentioned is a solar eclipse, and yes, we have a solar eclipse coming in a few weeks, but that's going to be at the end of the month of Ramadan. The solar eclipse that is foretold is in the middle of the month of Ramadan, when solar eclipses don't normally take place, and a lunar eclipse that will take place at the beginning of the month. Some scholars have said that this may be a miracle, or it may be that the eclipsing will take place with, say, a man-made satellite that will come and will obscure or eclipse the sun or the moon outside of the normal order. This is a sign that we can't say specifically what is it referring to. Is it an astronomical event that will be a calamity, or is it referring to a man-made event? Is it a definitive sign or not? It's not something that we can say with certainty. There are other signs that are tantalizing perhaps, but again, we cannot say with certainty. One of them is the appearance of a false Messiah known as Dajjal, who, according to narrations, and there are many narrations found in Sunni sources and also in Shi'i sources, somewhat fewer in quantity, but they are found in our sources as well, that there will be a false Messiah, and he will be killed by Prophet Isa alayhi salam in a place called Lud, which is a city Lod in present-day occupied Palestine. Now, we can't say exactly when or what that is referring to, but those are some of the signs that are mentioned of non-definitive signs. And then finally, there are certain definitive signs. These are called alaim mahtuma or hatmiya, the definitive signs. And there is a dispute among scholars as to whether even these definitive signs may be subject to a change in God's decree. There is one hadith that distinguishes between a definitive sign, which can be subject to some change, and mi'ad, which is a divine promise. The appearance of Imam Mahdi is God's promise, and Allah la yukhliful mi'ad. He does not go back on his promise. But even a definitive sign, there may or may not be some change in the manner or the order or even the occurrence of that sign, although this is a discussion among scholars, and perhaps we can say the majority of scholars say that the definitive signs will take place and are not subject to bada, are not subject to a change. And there are 5 main signs that are definitive signs. I will mention these and then conclude. One is the appearance of a Sufyani, a figure affiliated with and loyal to the family of Abu Sufyan, and who will oppose in particular the followers and the lovers of Ahlul Bayt. It will cause great destruction, conquer territory, and actually set a prize and a reward for capturing and for killing the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, and will send an army to oppose Imam Mahdi. And that will bring to the second sign, which is known as Khasf bil Bayda. Bayda is a region between Mecca and Medina. This army of the Sufyani is reported to come to that area and will be swallowed up by the earth, except for 2 soldiers who will not be killed. And miraculously, Allah will bring that very powerful and arrogant army and king or ruler to a very disgraceful end. The third sign is the appearance of a figure known as Yamani, also tantalizing, but we don't know the details. Some ahadith tell us that this is going to be somebody who will appear at the same time as the Sufyani, at the same time as another figure mentioned in a hadith, the Khurasani, will be a person who will call to true guidance, will have a true banner, and will come out in support of or to point people towards following Ahlul Bayt. The fourth definitive sign that is mentioned in a hadith is a killing of nafs zakiyah, a purified soul, who according to some narrations will be a messenger from Imam Mahdi, or will be a pure soul, pure believer following Imam Mahdi, and he will be killed in Mecca, according to some narrations, just after the days of Hajj. And according to those narrations that tell us that the appearance of Imam Mahdi will be on the day of Ashura, then the sequence fits, because according to a hadith from Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam, this pure soul, nafs zakiyah, will be martyred unjustly and without any crime or without any sin after the days of Hajj. So the Imam is reported to have said that that will be less than 15 days before the appearance of Imam Mahdi. So this is perhaps one of those imminent signs that in Hajj there will be a commotion, there will be pure blood that will be shed right in the vicinity of the Kaaba after the Hajj, and very soon after that, within a matter of days and nights, the Imam will appear. And another sign that is mentioned as an imminent sign, and one of those definitive mahtum signs, is that there will be a call made from the heavens. Some narrations say that will be the voice of Jibreel, that will call people and say that the truth is with Imam Ali and the Imams from the family of the Prophet, and that will strike fear into the hearts of people, and that will take place in the month of Ramadan. So once again, these are some of the narrations that we have about some of the definitive or the imminent signs before the appearance of the Imam. Now don't start calculating when the eclipses are going to take place and what these signs may mean, but they are meant, as we said, to give us a hope and to give us a feeling of the imminence and the urgency of our loyalty and our identification with the path of Ahlul Bayt. Whenever we see something that might be a sign, it is a good idea and good practice to say that, "Oh Allah, I pray that this be a sign of the imminent fulfillment of your promise, but I don't know. And if it is not, then I am not going to lose faith, and I am not going to say, well, I guess it's not happening after all." So it is a means for us to remove the distractions that come from our mundane life, attend to the promise of Allah and to what is truly important, and inshallah, Allah has promised that He does not forget, and that His decree comes according to a divine wisdom and infinite wisdom. We pray to Allah that we see the fulfillment of those signs that will bring us tidings of the appearance of the Imam, and that all of us are able to witness his appearance and partake in his mission and benefit from the illumination and the guidance that will come when his banner is unfurled and his message spreads through every corner of the earth. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah Maulana. For his health and well-being and continued success, please recite a very loud salawat. Maulana gave us a lot of food for thought, and hopefully that will generate lots of questions. As he said, it is a tantalizing topic. Our next speech will be by Shaykh Rizwan Arastu, and is, in my opinion, even more important because it is on the duties of the believers towards the Imam. It's great to know all these signs and this and that, but if we don't do our duties and know our duties to the Imam, what good will that make us? So I will ask him to come up. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So a good transition from the topic that we talked about, what are the duties that we have in this ghaiba as we're awaiting these ala'im al-dhuhur, these signs of the end times. There are literally lists of the kinds of duties that we have, and I'll share some of them, but I want actually to focus on something beyond these lists of duties. There's a book, if some of you are taking a class with Sayyid Sulayman right now on Mikyal al-Makarim. It's a book by one of our scholars, Mirza Muhammad Taqi al-Isfahani, and it's a very important book, and the second whole volume basically contains the answer to this question: what is our duty in the ghaiba as we await the Imam? And he lists 80 different things that he's identified from ahadith, where there are recommendations for du'as and for different kinds of introspection and action. I'll read some of those 80, not the entire list, to give us an idea of the kinds of things, but I want to focus on something else. So he mentions, for instance, the importance of knowing the Imam. What are his attributes? What kind of attributes does he have? That's something that we have to be able to recognize when he comes. Then we have to be able to identify him with what we know the Imam to be. Allahumma arifni nafsak, the dua that we are recommended to recite. This is one of the things. If we know who the Imam is, what kinds of attributes he'll have, then when he's in front of us, then we'll be able to match him with the ideal that we have in our mind. He says that the ma'rifah, that knowledge of the Imam, is not just through reading and studying. Like all true ma'rifah, true knowledge, there are steps that we can take to learn and read and discuss through our regular methods of learning. But the knowledge that comes into the heart, the enlightenment that comes, is something that is an effulgence from Allah. Something that He has to give us. There's tawfiq in that knowledge, there's barakah in that knowledge. And that's something even more important than the knowledge itself. Not separate, but if we have to do our own part, but then we have to make sure that that knowledge is enlightened by Allah, so it becomes something that's actually useful. Otherwise, sometimes we can know a lot, but then the knowledge leads to arrogance, or the knowledge leads to defiance, or asking questions for the wrong reasons, and those kinds of things. So knowledge doesn't always mean enlightenment, but the knowledge that we are seeking and we want has to lead us to enlightenment. Otherwise, it's actually more harmful than helpful. We have to love him, we have to encourage others and make others love him. We shouldn't be forces to repel people from the Imam and the Imam school. We should be those who attract people towards the Ahlul Bayt in general, and in particular people who are awaiting and are passionately in love with the idea of the Imam, his mission. He tells us we should await his advent. Right? The dhuhur of the Imam is something that we should want. We should be eager to meet him. We should think about his virtues, his attributes. What are those things that he stands for, that he is, that he embodies? We should lament our separation from him. This is one of the duties he mentions. Right? This idea, nudba, even the name Nudba, it means to have this lamentation, to lament. Where are you? What am I doing wrong that you're not here? Are there people who will share in my tears as I wait for him? Like that kind of emotion is something that we should cultivate within ourselves. That we're not just excited and energized for the appearance, but we're also introspective and thinking, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with, what have I not done to allow me to see him? To participate in gatherings, he says, like this, where he's mentioned, he's remembered, he's prayed for. To write poetry, to read poetry in his praise, and then also to patronize the writing and the reading of this poetry. That's also something interesting, and this is something Shaykh Faizi has talked about, and he's trying to get this initiative also started, that we need to cultivate English poetry, and one of the ways to do it historically through the Ahlul Bayt have shown us is to patronize poets, pay them, give them sacks of gold, because that's an incentive for them to do this and create that art that is a way to attract people towards them and towards goodness. And so this is also something that we should engage in to particularly encourage this remembrance of Imam Mahdi through poetry. One of the things he mentions is this tradition that we have embodied to stand when we mention his name, especially certain of his titles, in honor of him. And even if not physically standing, but that idea, sometimes we treat the name of Allah without the due honor. In English, this is one of the problems with the language. When we say Allah, we'll say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah azza wa jal. We have in our sharia even, it's haram to touch the name of Allah without wudu. And that creates this aura, even around the written lafdhul jalala or any of his special attributes, that it shouldn't be treated casually. One of the 10 commandments was not to take God's name in vain. And you'll find Christians and maybe Jews also, they'll take that very seriously sometimes, not to just speak God's name. Sometimes they take it to an extreme and they don't speak his name at all and they forget him. That's of course not right. But when you speak it with honor, speak it with a due respect and veneration of Allah's name, and then that should carry over into the names of these ma'sumeen, these figures, the Prophet's names. Speak about them with respect and not in a casual way that makes them seem like they're just one of us. All right, so he mentions many other things, like I mentioned, 80 different things he lists, including collecting arms and provisions, like kind of the prepping type of a mentality to get ready for his mission, so that we can also participate whenever it's time. So those duties are there. You can see those lists, and those are definitely things to think about and to do. The du'as, we have plenty of du'as, specifically for Imam al-Hujjah. One of the things I think we should maybe focus on as we think of our duties toward him is how can we avoid following in the footsteps of people before who have been muntazir and then have failed when the muntazar comes. We have a lot of examples in our history of this phenomenon. Right? Intizar is this idea of awaiting and actively and eagerly awaiting, right? So the muntazir, we are muntazirun in one sense, that we are awaiting our Imam, and he is al-Imam al-Muntazar, the one whom we are awaiting. I'll mention a couple of examples. Two of them are Quranic examples and one from our own history. So many of the prophets had been prophesied by previous prophets. So we have, for instance, Isa alayhi salam being foretold, the advent of Isa, his signs, all of these things foretold, even the fact that he is the Messiah, being foretold by his predecessors. And this had created a eagerness amongst the Jewish community for this Messiah. We're told that there are 600 prophets between Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam, all for the Bani Israel. This is one of the ways that Allah selected them and blessed them. Faddalahum, he did a tafdeel and he favored them over all other nations by giving them 600 prophets just for them. These are not universal prophets, they're prophets just for this one race of people. Not to mention all the other prophets that Allah might have sent that we don't know about to other people, but He selected them for this. Musa is the first of them, and then they continue, and the message was that this Messiah will come. And the Jews, in their kind of typical treatment of divine privileges and divine blessings, they manipulate, they reject, they play games with Allah's guidance. And this is recounted over and over again in the Quran. I'll read one verse that really kind of lists basically all of their crimes that led to them finally, when the Messiah came, for them not only to reject Him, but even to conspire to try to kill Him. Right? So in Surah An-Nisa, we have the following. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. فَبِمَا نَقْضِهِمْ مِيثَاقَهُمْ وَكُفْرِهِمْ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَقَتْلِهِمُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ وَقَوْلِهِمْ قُلُوبُنَا غُلْفٌ بَلْ طَبَعَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهَا بِكُفْرِهِمْ فَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. In typical style, the Quran, it's listing, and then it goes into digressions, and it mentions something about each of these, some of these lists, some of these items in the list. But one thing He mentions is that they went against, they reneged on the covenants that they had made with Allah. Right? Faithfulness to the covenant, especially with Allah, is something so important. Every covenant that we make has to be our bond. Our word is our bond. That has to be the way we live. And they reneged on the covenants they made with Allah. They were ungrateful for and rejected the signs that Allah sent. Think of all those miracles. Surah Al-Baqarah mentions all of these different privileges that He gave, a cloud to shield them, and free food, manna and quail for them to simply collect and eat, ready food whenever they needed it and wanted it. The guidance, water, you didn't have to search for it or anything, strike a rock and the water gushes forth. There's so countless blessings that they were given, and they were ungrateful for these signs. وَقَتْلِهِمُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. They killed their prophets. Now, I'm not aware, I don't think we have any mention of any prophets specifically who were killed. Not that, at least unless I'm blanking. But we don't have any specific mention of prophets being killed by Bani Israel. But this attribute that they did kill prophets, out of the 600, only a handful are mentioned in the Quran and in our tradition. But this crime is mentioned as one of the crimes that they did commit. Not only they intended to commit it with Isa alayhi salam, but they actually did commit it, and this was one of the reasons why Allah retracted His blessings from them. Worse than all, maybe an underpinning of all of those crimes is their justification for their own wretchedness. They claimed, قُلُوبُنَا غُلْفٌ. Our hearts are sealed. It's not my fault. It's just the way I am. It's what God's made me like this. If I don't understand the truth, it's God's made me, so it's too complicated. What you're saying is too high, and I'm not there yet. I can't understand the truth. I can't perceive the signs. And so they made these excuses and passed the buck back to Allah, that you have made us like this. And in fact, you're the one who tells us that if we do certain things, then طَبَعَ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ, Allah will seal their hearts. And they say, well, there's your answer. It's your fault. Yes, I did something that made you seal my heart, but now you seal my heart, that's why I can't understand. It's your fault, not my fault. So this playing games with causality and responsibility until you finally find some way to shirk responsibility and outsource it to someone else. Right? That's the quality that these people had. وَبِكُفْرِهِمْ وَقَوْلِهِمْ عَلَى مَرْيَمَ بُهْتَانًا عَظِيمًا. He mentions the kinds of allegations that the Bani Israel leveled against Maryam alayhi salam. She comes out of the wilderness. In a hadith it says that she came back from Karbala, or from Najaf, where she gave birth to Isa alayhi salam. And miraculously she comes back to Jerusalem, and she has a three-day-old child with her, not being married. They all jump to the conclusion that you must have done something bad. And they make these accusations, and that's why Allah gives Isa alayhi salam the ability to speak from her arms and to say, Inni Abdullahi atani al-kitab wa ja'alani nabiyya, to introduce himself and absolve his mother of whatever false accusations they were making. But this was the crime of the Jews, that they made the accusation in the first place. Someone from that pure lineage, with that kind of precedence of ibadah, seclusion in the temple, under the care of Zakaria, the daughter of the Prophet Imran, and to jump to the conclusion, not give the benefit of the doubt, not try to understand what she has done and what kind of sign this is, but to jump to the conclusion that you must have done something wrong, was a crime that Allah is calling them out for. Could I get some water, please? And there he says, وَقَوْلِهِمْ إِنَّا قَتَلْنَا الْمَسِيحَ عِيسَى بْنَ مَرْيَمَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. They not only, it seems like they take pride in it, and that's what he's calling them out for. The fact that they conspired with the Roman authorities to try to kill Isa alayhi salam, who was sent to them as a guide. He is the awaited one. He is the muntazar, that through 600 prophets and countless centuries they've been awaiting. And now Allah sends him, and he's not sent in an unknown, quiet sort of a way, with the miracles that inspire awe in everyone. To be able to raise the dead and cure the lepers and to restore sight to people who had no sight. This was no small miracle. To give life to birds made out of clay and really create life by the will of God. These are not small signs. But they're able to see these miracles that he performs and still reject him. And not only reject him and not believe in him, but then conspire with authorities to kill him. And maybe worse than the conspiracy was the pride that they took afterwards. They felt like we were successful, we did it. We were able to kill him. قَوْلِهِمْ إِنَّا قَتَلْنَا الْمَسِيحَ ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. We did it, we killed the Messiah, we killed the Messenger of God. And then parenthetically Allah says, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُم. They didn't kill him, they didn't crucify him, it was made to appear like that to them. They thought they did it, but through whatever dissimulation, Allah protected Isa alayhi salam, and رَفَعَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ, He raised him up. Alright, so these are some attributes that we have, and this is a story that we have to take admonishment from. That they were in intizar, they had everything was given to them, the guidance was given to them, and the salvation that was at the hands of the Messiah was the exact thing that they tried to destroy and to reject. What are the qualities that leads a people to do that? Right, that is something that we have to reflect on. How can we avoid following in their footsteps? Another story with the same people, the Bani Israel, happens when they are now told that the last prophet will come in Arabia with these different attributes. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the Quran tells us pieces of their story. In Surah Al-Isra, it tells us how the prediction was made to them that the temple will be destroyed twice. It is destroyed a second time, and then they're expelled from Jerusalem. So the Israelites are removed from there, and partly because they're removed, they needed a new home, and partly because of these prophecies, many of them, a group of them, moved into Wadi al-Qura, right, where Medina, Khaybar, Fadak, Tayma, these different cities are there, and they set up their settlements there. Why? In answer to these prophecies that they know that the last prophet will come in these areas, and they even have specific ideas that he will be born in Mecca and he will move to Medina, there will be a hijrah. All these different things, the details are there for them. The verse in Surah Al-Baqarah that recounts this and their attitude towards this, one of the ironic things is that the people who came from Medina, the Arabs who came from Aus and Khazraj to Mecca and sought out the Prophet and gave their pledge of allegiance to him. We're told there's 6 people who did this in the first Bay'ah of Aqaba. Right? Why did they come, and why were they seeking him in the first place? It was all because they had heard from the Jews that there's a prophet who's going to be coming and that the signs are close at hand. And so as they start to hear rumblings and rumors, then they come to Mecca to investigate themselves. And they are the first people to give their allegiance to him and to invite him to Medina. And they even cite that it's because of the Jews in Medina that we are even aware of this prophecy, and we've come, and now that we see that you're the fulfillment of whatever we heard from them, we accept and we invite you to Medina. But what about the people who gave them the knowledge? The Israelites, the Jews of Medina, were the staunchest enemies of Rasulullah. وَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ كِتَابٌ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ مُصَدِّقٌ لِمَا مَعَهُمْ وَكَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ يَسْتَفْتِحُونَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مَا عَرَفُوا كَفَرُوا بِهِ فَلَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah tells us that these Jews who used to use the prophecies that they had received, that the last prophet will come and we will be the first to support him, they would use this as a threat against the Arabs of Medina. Because there's tension, they had some alliances, but there's tension between them. A lot of the wealth was with the Jews. The best agricultural land of Medina was with the Jews. The Aus and the Khazraj were in a kind of a weaker position, even if their numbers were greater in Medina, in Yathrib. And so the Jews, at every squabble, every skirmish, then they would say, one day the prophet's going to come, we're going to be the first to support him, and along with him, we're going to wipe you all out, we're going to crush you. And this was their constant threat. They were doing intadhar, they were waiting for the prophet, they were ready to follow him and all of this. But the ones who actually follow him, who actually submit to him, are the ones who are being threatened. They had some more purity in them to be able to take that seriously and actually act on it. And when they meet the person who is the muntadhar, they are the first to accept. And the ones who had been waiting for centuries and had scripture and scholars telling them were the ones to reject. These are two Quranic examples, and then closer to our own time is Karbala. So the people of Kufa are also muntadhirun. They are also in a state of waiting for their Imam. And they're actively reaching out to him. This is the time you have tens of thousands of people ready to support you. Come to Kufa and you have swords ready, you have an army ready for you, and we will rise up against Yazid. And he sends Muslim, and the initial response is good because things are still easy, but as soon as things become difficult with the coming of Ibn Ziyad, then their faith is tested, and almost all of them are found wanting. So these examples, I think, are excellent for us to keep in front of us as we think, what is my duty and how do I prepare for my Imam? How do I take this as a negative example? Right, Luqman alayhi salam, famously, he's asked, how did you become so wise? And his response is, I looked at all the juhal, all the fools around me, and I learned the negative example from them. I did the opposite and thought the opposite to them and became wise. So that negative example is sometimes very instructive. You can see what not to do. What are the pitfalls? What are the things to avoid? So that, I think, is something that we can reflect on, and that becomes a very tangible and very, I think, a very good guiding light for us to make sure that we are not setting ourselves up for the same kind of failure. What are some of those critical qualities that we need to have? So my point is that the practice is reciting Dua Nudba every Friday or every Eid is an excellent practice. The content of the dua, the reflection on that, the act of the ibadah is wonderful. Reading books, taking classes, having discussions, engaging in ibadah, going for ziyarah, all these things that, for instance, Mirza Isfahani has mentioned and others have also mentioned, those are all excellent practices, but the framework and that guiding light has to be there. Otherwise, what happens is it's very possible, very easy for us to go through the motions of different acts. But if there's no spirit behind them and there's no guidance that links that all together and tells what the purpose is, then we can get stuck in the ritual and in the action, and we don't get the result that was supposed to lead us toward. And it can happen with something as fundamental as prayer. Think of salah. We know how fundamental salah is, But it's very easy if you don't, for instance, even think about the meaning of the salah, or the reason why salah is so important, or what the goals that you're supposed to get out of salah are. It's very easy to spend your entire life being very diligent with your not only wajibat, but maybe even nawafil. And after a lifetime of praying, you're still no better really than you were at the beginning of your life when you started praying. It's not an automatic that if I do my salah, automatically I'll be an excellent person. If I go to majalis, I'll automatically be a Husayni and an outstanding Shi'i of Hussein. There's no automatic. When it comes to spiritual growth and the development of the soul, there are no automatics. Just going through the motions doesn't guarantee the results. So there has to be reflection on the purpose, on the reason why things are in place, and only then do these necessary means become actually a means for getting to the result of purification of the soul, or of, in this case, getting ourselves in a position where when the Imam makes his call, we'll actually be the ones to answer against all odds, even if it means sacrificing everything, as opposed to those many examples that we now have, the Bani Israel, the Kufans, who made the calls maybe more fervently than you and I do, but when it came time to actually fulfill, then they weren't ready, they weren't willing. I think there are a couple of qualities. We have about 10 more minutes for this, or maybe 5 more minutes. I'll take 5 more minutes. There are a couple of qualities I think to focus on that again are not to replace that list of different ibadat, the different reflections that we should do, but maybe are even more fundamental and can guide all the rest. And these are things that we can test in ourselves constantly. One is to have a spirit of humility, and humility towards Allah and truth, and also towards fellow believers. So one of the things that sometimes religious people, devout people lack is they end up with a sense of arrogance. Right? As I learn more, it's very easy to get into a position where I start to feel superior. I start to feel like I know everything, I know more than you, and even I know, more than God. If I can question His wisdom, for instance, right? Why did you do this? Why did you take this child from me? There's no justification for it. Why did I fail when I did everything right? What have I not done for you, and now you've done this? You failed in this way towards me. The underpinning for that kind of sentiment is I know better than you. I know I have more wisdom than you, and you've done something wrong. God, something like that. That becomes the way that I'm thinking. Why? Because I have knowledge, and I don't have the requisite humility to temper that knowledge and put it in its right place. So that humility is something that will lead us constantly toward making sure that when truth is presented to me, I'm willing to accept it. No matter what it means, whatever the cost. Right? That idea of sacrificing for the truth, that only makes sense if I'm willing to humble myself before the truth. Otherwise, when the Imam comes, if I second guess him and I say, well, no, you're making this, you're calling for this strategy, you're saying this is this course of action is good for our movement, I say, no, I don't think so. I have a different opinion. And let me tell you my opinion. Right? We offer him that kind of mashwara, which is not actually mashwara, it's an arrogant kind of a misreading of the situation. And it's like that situation in Badr. Rasulullah asked for mashwara from his companions, and the first two, Abu Bakr and Umar, when they speak up, they speak with thinking that he actually wants them to tell him what they think, instead of seeing what he wants and what's in the best interest of the movement. And they say, no, they're too powerful. We don't have enough arms. They're gonna crush us. We're gonna die. We shouldn't do this. We should leave. It's when Miqdad speaks up and he says, no, he learns the lesson from the Bani Israel. He said, Rasulullah, we are not like the Bani Israel, who were standing at the gates of Jerusalem, saying, "Idhab anta wa rabbuka faqatila inna hahuna qa'idun." You and your God go into Jerusalem, you fight those people, you do what you have to do, we'll sit here and see what happens. He says, no, rather we say, "Idhab anta wa rabbuka faqatila inna ma'akum muqatilun." You go with your Lord first, and we are with you, we'll fight with you. And the Rasulullah says, that's the right mashwara, that's what I wanted. I didn't want this kind of opinion that's going to detract from the movement, that's going to go against my wisdom. I want you to embody and to internalize an alignment with what I want you to do. And that's what Miqdad was able to bring. And that sets the tone for people following the Prophet into Badr. And then the rest, we know, is history. My small force is able to defeat a large force against all odds because of that kind of sincerity. So humility, the willingness to sacrifice, even like to be able to give up everything. Those of you, some of you are converts, you might know converts, they've done this. They had, I think, all that you have because of your religion, all the ties, family, maybe wealth, like all things that are tied to you as a person. And then sometimes when you convert, you might sacrifice all of that. Your family might cut you off. They might cut you out of their will. Your people who you had business ties with might say, I'm not going to have any dealings with you anymore. You lose so much. It's a huge sacrifice sometimes. But the person sees that this is truth, that was falsehood, I'm willing to do it even if it means I have to sacrifice all this stuff. But sometimes those of us who are born into Islam, we may not have ever felt that kind of sacrifice for the sake of the deen. A willingness to even go against something I've always been taught. Everyone's always taught me this. It's been passed down for generations, and now I realize, I see that it's wrong. This practice was wrong. That misconception about the deen was wrong. And I see that something else is right. Are we willing to say, since this makes sense, all the evidence points me towards it, all the guidance of people who know more than me guides me to this, even if that means I have to cut ties with practices that were there for generations amongst my family, am I willing to sacrifice that and submit to the truth? Because if I'm not willing to do that, when Imam Mahdi comes and we're told it'll be as though ya'ti bi dinin jadid, it seems like he's bringing a new religion because we're so out of sync with what he wants us, what he is trying to teach us from the Sunnah of Rasulullah. We've gone, he's going to correct us from our misguidance. If I don't have this attitude of submission to anything that is truth, anything that the evidence points toward, then I'm not going to be in a good position. I'll say, no, this is bid'ah, this is wrong, this is not what I know to be truth. I'm not willing to follow this. And we're setting ourselves up for following in the footsteps of these Bani Israel and the Kufans. So that humility, I think, is really important. Another last point I'll make is we have a Quranic principle that appreciation of blessing leads to an increase in the blessing. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you're grateful, then Allah will give more. And sometimes what we do is we have all of these signs of the Imam and his appearance. And we have these lofty goals of what we need to do and what we want to be. And we think that once he actually comes, then I'll do it. I want to aim for the best and the most. I'm not willing to look at the things I have close at hand, the blessings that I have close at hand, but I'm looking for something greater. I think the Kufans probably are another good example for this. When things started getting difficult for the Kufans, their attitude was that you're just Muslim, you're not Imam Hussein yet. Yes, we pledge to you, yes, you're important as the representative of the Imam, but you're not the real Imam, you're not the real thing. So right now I'll compromise, right now I'll do what I need to do to save myself, to save my family. When the Imam comes, then I'll answer. But right now, you're just Muslim. So the blessing that you have at hand, if you reject that, then that seals off further blessing. Because the converse is also true. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. If you're ungrateful for God's blessings, then there's no further blessing. He'll cut off even the blessings you have. He definitely won't give you more blessing. So if you avail yourself of the blessings you have access to your local scholars. You don't need to wait for Shaykh Bahjat to come and talk to you and say, well, once I meet Shaykh Bahjat, then I will, then I'll commit myself, or then I'll learn, and then I'll submit myself to take a class. If I can get him to teach me, then I'm willing to take a class. If you have a local scholar, if you have someone who has some knowledge who can share with you, locally and you're not taking advantage of that, then definitely you're not going to get a bigger blessing until you avail yourself of the blessing at hand. If you say, we don't have access to a big Islamic library, we can't even check out books from the library here, it's like, I can't read. You have books at home, you have access to books at home. Are you reading the books that you have? If you avail yourself of what you do have, then other blessings Allah will open doors and more blessings can come. Like that, if we can not think always on that grand scale, there's this saying that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's not an all or nothing proposition that either I need the bahjat of the Imam himself and I need those kinds of resources. Once I have the best resources, then I'll kick into gear. But right now I need to bide my time. I have so many responsibilities. I have to take care of myself, my family's finances, all these different things. I don't have time for all those things. But I'll have time once the Imam says, okay, drop everything and come with me. It doesn't work like that. You don't go from 0 to 100. We have to take whatever we can get, more like give whatever we can give as we can give it. If I can sacrifice the little time, sacrifice the little money I have, sacrifice the little efforts I can give for the small goods that I have available to me, then there's capacity for me to give something more and do something more. And then eventually, if I keep on this trajectory, then I can there's a likelihood, there's a hope that I can make huge sacrifices if the Imam really asks me to. Otherwise, we're fooling ourselves. I pray to Allah, I ask Him to first shower His blessing and mercy on Rasulullah and his family, and especially the Imam of our time, and to guide us through the knowledge that we have, help us to avail ourselves of that knowledge, help us to act on whatever we know, forgive us for our sins, and inshallah hasten the advent of the Imam and make us amongst his followers. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah. Also another great presentation for Shaykh Rizwan's health, well-being, and continued success. Please recite a very loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. We will open it up for questions. So, if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Okay, we're going to start here. And sisters, I will have a mic for you guys as well.
There's a really interesting point around humility and how we should cultivate humility, but oftentimes, as you said, there isn't really a shortcut to anything. And I know one of the courses that was held here focused on how namaz or salah is supposed to, the main purpose is humility. Is there, and I know this is sort of contrary to what you were saying, there is no shortcut, but is there some way to prevent the erosion of humility so that if you find yourself climbing steps, you don't find yourself at the beginning of the staircase every time you find yourself being arrogant again?
Before we worry about falling down, we have to first start going up. The only thing I know is to just be aware of ourselves, and every opportunity we have to have an interaction with humility, then we have to do it. So start with just what you have with your family, your interaction with your spouse. Right? You have an argument, you don't see eye to eye. So how are you dealing with that? If you interact, if it's like I'm not interested in what's right or what's the best. I'm just interested in whatever I say. I'm going to force that. Then I'm already on an arrogant footing. So that's a very easy thing. You might not think of that as spiritual training and something Islamic and dini. It's not, but it's very practical and it's a necessary. That is a test, and that is not only a test, a pass and fail test. And all these tests are also opportunities to fix it. So I can fail today, but I need to figure out how I can succeed tomorrow in the next argument. So every day we have these opportunities. If we avail ourselves of those, then we are going forward. We are going upwards.
Thank you. Sisters, any questions over there? We'll give equal opportunity. Don't say that we didn't give equal opportunity. No, while you're thinking about questions, any more questions here? Okay. Fawad.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you, Shayukh, for a very insightful presentation. I have a more pragmatic kind of question rather than just a general question. Let's suppose someone stands up in Makkah today and says, I'm Imam Mahdi. How do I know if this is the real Imam Mahdi or just an impostor? Because we had a lot of imposters in history claiming to be Imam Mahdi.
So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I think this is somewhat related to the signs of the appearance. So there will be immediate signs, but one thing to bear in mind is that signs can be faked, and there have always been efforts to stage manage the signs. So if a hadith says that, for example, there will be black flags that will come from the east, well, any messianic group that wants to make people think that they are the true supporters of Imam Mahdi, or the ones who will bring Imam Mahdi, they'll fake those flags, those banners, that name, even naming a son the name of Imam Mahdi or the name of the Prophet in the hope of fooling people. All of these things existed within history. One thing that we find in a hadith is that it is not your job to determine the truth of a claimant. It is the job of the claimant to give an overwhelming proof of the truth of their claim. That hujjah is the responsibility and the role of the ma'soom to assert. And what Imam said is that until that hujjah has come, then you are to maintain the certainty that you have and the faith that you have based on the teachings that have authentically come to you from the Prophet and from Ahlul Bayt. So yes, you have to make an effort to try to find out and to determine, but the burden is not on you. The burden or the responsibility is that of the Imam. And this is not the first time. So for example, the Imamat of Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi salam, and I'll talk a little bit about this. In the next talk is a very good example of this. Many people were confused, even prominent companions of Imam Ja'far Sadiq in the beginning of the Imamat of the seventh Imam. The same thing is true of the beginning of the Imamat of Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam. And it is the role of the Imam to answer questions, to bring a conclusive and a convincing proof. The basis for me to be able to recognize and follow that proof is going to be some of the things that Shaykh Rizwan mentioned in his talk, which is your humility and your sincerity, and not your cleverness or your calculation or your knowledge of the signs. So especially aside from the imminent signs, it is the piety, the taqwa, the humility that is going to be a factor that will allow me to recognize the Imam sooner rather than later. Eventually all of humanity will have that proof completed for them. But those who will recognize it early are similar to the people who recognize the Prophet early rather than those who recognized it years later. Similar to those who recognize the truth of each successive Imam early rather than those who recognized it later. So that sunnah is not going to change for Imam Mahdi. It's the same factors and the same sunnah that will be applied for Imam Mahdi that were in effect for the previous divine proofs, the hujjah of Allah in previous generations.
So just as a corollary to that, is it safe to say then it's okay to be skeptical of any type of claimant, even if if the actual Imam came and you're skeptical at the beginning, that's okay because that's a healthy type of, to make sure that you're not fooled into something and going off the right path. And then as you see the signs, then you obviously submit to the truth if it's the truth.
Yes, it is healthy to be skeptical. I won't use the term skeptical.
Okay.
Because when it's difficult, sometimes it's just a matter of how we're conceiving or defining the term, what is cynicism, what is skepticism. But what we can say is maybe the best way to phrase the concept is that you remain with the certainty that you have until you have a certainty and a hujjah, a proof that supplants it. So that's not really skepticism in the sense that you're inclined to disbelieve, but it is skepticism in the sense that you are not superstitious, you're not so, it's like somebody who may want to get rich quick. Because they want it so bad, they become gullible and they become prey to people who want to take advantage of them. Or somebody who has an incurable disease, it's a whole market for people to sell some fake medicine to try to take their money and convince them that they can still be cured. So you don't want to be gullible, but you don't want to be disinclined to believe. And the way to think of that is that you stay with the certainty that you have based on the teachings of Ahlul Bayt until certainty comes to you. And that's exactly what the Imam said at the stages that were difficult in the time of previous Imams. And maybe one of the reasons for those difficult beginnings of previous Imams was to give people experience and practice for that kind of a test. For the birth and the occultation of Imam Mahdi, and also for his appearance and the establishment of his message. So we have a hadith and we have a historical example of how to maintain your faith and how to attain certainty, and that same thing will apply. So yes, it is good to be skeptical in the sense of not being gullible. But we will phrase that as saying that you keep the certainty that you have on the basis of authentic teachings of religion until the proof of God is complete for you. And inshallah, if we learn about the teachings of Ahlul Bayt and we are practicing and we are humble and sincere, then may Allah make us among those who recognize the Imam not after months or years, but at the very beginning of his mission. Just like, people like Abu Dhar, far away in the desert, sent his brother and then went forward that, what is this message? I'm waiting for it. And I need to find out if it's true. And one meeting with the Prophet, and that's all that was needed. Meanwhile, there were people in Medina, in Mecca, who heard the Prophet day in and day out and were not inclined to accept.
Jazakallah. More questions? There's one in the back. Oh, there's two in the back. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I had one question regarding some things that we can do for our Imam. Specifically, I believe in the discussion it was mentioned that some things that will happen amongst the signs, our values will be inverted in our ummah. How as a community itself, how are we able to prevent this from happening? Other than, of course, practicing the 5 pillars of Islam, what are some other ways that we could essentially try to prevent our values from being inverted later in the future?
It seems like the simple answer is to stay connected to these teachings that we have and to the means that we have to educate ourselves. So those trends are trends that come first of all from outside. The society at large is kind of heading into moral decline and distance from goodness. So it seems like we have to ground ourselves in the teachings that we have, and also at the same time insulate ourselves or strengthen ourselves against those trends that are there in the outside world. So that's a difficult challenge, but that's theoretically it's straightforward. The doing of it is the hard part.
Moulana, do you want to add anything, or?
I think one other thing that's true, and I think one other thing that we can add is that it's helpful to not be apologetic or reactive in our practice of our faith. So sometimes in a community or in a family setting, we are almost embarrassed about our values and about our belief. So sometimes I might have a Muslim name, but I change it because Muhammad sounds too Muslim. Or I might want to name my children and I say, what's a kind of anonymous sort of name? And so, I'll choose a name like Daniel, for example, because it can easily switch to Daniel, rather than choosing a name that is conspicuously and very proudly Muslim. Now, we do have a hadith that Daniel was the name of a prophet, and there's nothing wrong with that name. But if the reason why I'm choosing a name is in order to give anonymity, then it might be something that will not give courage and a source of reinforcement of our faith and our identity at an important time. And a hadith, they tell us that when it comes to wajibat, you do it publicly. You don't have to, steal away and hide and perform your wajib prayer. Or give your wajib khums or zakat or fasting in the month of Ramadan, pretend that you're not doing it. Don't try to anonymize your practice of your faith. Yes, something that is not wajib, that is mustahab, that's between you and God. You don't advertise it, become a show-off or arrogant. But I think the public performance of our faith that can give a guardrail to society, to the family, to a circle of friends, to a community, that we are proud that we know who Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi is. And a name or a title of the Prophet is an honor for me to be able to name my son. We are proud of our recognition of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And a name or a title of Sayyidah Fatima is an honor for me to name my daughter. And the same thing with our practice.
I think there was another question in the sisters. Since we had two in the brothers, we can give one more.
Assalamu alaikum. I think my question is actually sort of a continuation of what the sister had asked. Sorry, should I move? Is it?
You're right under a speaker.
Okay, I'll move to the side. I'm wondering specifically about Amr bil Maruf and Nahy anil Munkar and how it reverses, and the advice you would give to us on how we ensure that doesn't happen, despite the fact that we're living in a society that punishes us often and punishes our families or our children when we do Amr or Nahi. And so I'm trying to figure out, it feels like there's a tension between sometimes doing taqiyya, but also wanting to do Amr and Nahi on certain social issues. Or I don't know if we just need to accept that we're living in a battle of ideas and we might just need to be casualties of that, or if there are better ways to ensure that we stick to Amr and Nahi without sort of having to sacrifice our families or our well-being in that. I don't know if that made sense, but inshallah, I hope you can understand the question.
Are you talking about the culture of the society at large, or within Muslims themselves?
No, the culture of the society at large. I mean, just a really practical example, you think about LGBTQ issues and how so many of us in work are, you have to sign a DEI statement or that sort of a thing, or speak up about these things. And so sometimes it's I'll just call an absent on that day of work. So there are ways that we can work around it, but we're not actually actively speaking out against it because, again, it feels like you're in a constant battle of ideas. And so I'm just wondering, how do we make sure that in the times that we are silent, we're not actually reversing Amr and Nahi?
If you have some specific ideas.
So I'll begin. Maybe you can add some thoughts. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So to begin, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar implies that people know what is good and what is bad. So if something is ma'ruf, then you command to it, meaning if it's known to be good. If something is munkar, then you forbid it, meaning if it's known to be bad. If it's not known to be good and not known to be bad, then technically you won't do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, but you might have an obligation of trying to give information or to give instruction, to do ta'aleem, to teach. And that was one of the roles of the Prophet, to awaken people's conscience, because ma'ruf and munkar does not just depend on revelation. Sometimes it's within our fitrah and within our human conscience, but it needs to be awakened. And after people recognized what was good and what is bad, then the prophets and the imams, they established it. So in our society, sometimes we're not able to always treat the symptom, even if the symptom is a very important and a very painful reality in society. We might see the harms that exist, but you have to go back to the root, the point at which there is a divergence. So when it comes to some of these social issues, our message is that it's important to think about the purpose of our existence, the origin of our existence, not to get our values and our ideals just from our desires or our whims, but from an authentic and a genuine source. Think of it, for example, if somebody were to come to you and say, why do you believe in the imamat of Imam Muhammad Taqi alayhi salam? You do believe in the imamat of Imam Muhammad Taqi, but you won't answer that question right away. You will answer perhaps by talking about Tawheed, perhaps by talking about Nubuwah and what the purpose of Nubuwah is, by talking about imamat and the imamat of Imam Ali, and how Imam Ali then introduced the imams after him. And then you will eventually, so the symptom is that this person rejects one of the imams. But the treatment is not that you then just immediately go and say, well, this is why you should believe in this imam, because he was knowledgeable, or because he had miraculous knowledge and miracles even as a child. You know, he impressed the court of Ma'mun. People might say, so what? Unless you know what is imamat and who were the imams before him and what was the role of the prophethood. So with some of these social issues, we have to do the same thing. Look at the point of divergence, the point in which society went wrong, and try to at least draw people's attention, if not to getting the right answer, to asking the right questions. To have values that are rooted in something beyond our own whim is a very important thing for society. Even if somebody else decides to become a more faithful Christian or a follower of their religion, that's one step closer than somebody who doesn't care about asking questions of purpose of life at all. And then perhaps once those initial points of divergence are covered, a time may come when you can take that next step. Or maybe it will be a future time or a future generation that will be able to take that next step. So be proactive and try to act in a way that you do not reinforce un-Islamic values, and that you are enforcing or reinforcing Islamic values, but don't always worry about treating the symptom. If you are able to help a person, even a non-Muslim, strengthen their conscience, then do so. So if you have a friend, for example, who has a drinking problem, and they might not believe in Islam and they might not understand fiqh and sharia, but if you can convince them to reduce their drinking, to give up drinking, great. But in general, we'll have to go to that point of departure and strengthen our whatever circle of influence we have from that point.
We still have another session, so it's 2 speeches and more question and answers. So I think if you have more questions, you'll still have an opportunity to ask. You can still ask about these particular topics after, but I think maybe a 10-minute break, and we'll start back the second session at 4:15. There's no snacks or anything like that. There will be dinner after prayer before Amal, but maybe stretch your legs and splash some water on your face. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum. It's 4:15, so we are going to start the next session in the next minute or two. If you can start making your way back into the hall so we can maximize our time with the scholars and have as many questions and answered as possible. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I think we can do better than that on salawat, please. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum al-sharif. Thank you very much. So we will begin our second session. And I know it's difficult to pay attention for this long. Our attention spans are not meant for this anymore. But alhamdulillah, I think so far so good. People have been paying attention. The speeches have been engaging and useful, and we've had some questions. And I know there was questions continuing during the break as well. But we will start our second session. And in this session, Shaykh Rizwan Arastu will begin, and he will be speaking on the topic of Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam as a universal belief among Muslims. Please welcome Shaykh Rizwan with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are talking so far about our beliefs in Imam Mahdi alayhi salam from our own perspective as Shia. What are his characteristics? What are the signs of his appearance? And what are our duties towards him? From our own understanding, from our own position as followers of Ahlul Bayt. It's important for us to realize that this belief in the Mahdi, in a Mahdi, is a universally Muslim belief. It is not something that is has only come to us through the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, but rather Rasulullah himself was already mentioning this idea, and even those who deviated from the Ahlul Bayt, from Saqifa on, they do have these teachings. I want to share some ahadith with you from the books of ahadith of the Ahlul Sunnah. What we find is that there is almost a consensus amongst Sunni scholars throughout the ages that there is such a thing as Mahdi. And those ahadith that number in the hundreds that refer to him and things that he will do and different characteristics and different events, that this is all referring to an actual thing that will happen at the end of time. So what I'd like to do is first go through some of these traditions that they have, and you'll see many of them are very similar to what we also have from our imams, but we have much more detail in many cases. There are some outliers, and I'll make some mention of them as well. And then I'd like to focus a little bit on the difference. So if we both have the same belief, then what are the differences between our beliefs and understanding of Imam Mahdi from the Ahlul Bayt's teachings and Ahlul Sunnah's from the teachings of the Khulafa and the companions that they have followed and received their knowledge from. I'm not going to focus on other sects of Islam, the Zaydis or other sects of the Shia besides the Imami Shia. But I think these two will give us a sense, at least if we look at the Ahlul Sunnah and what they have said and what they have understood, then that is a good thing. One tendency, or maybe just one pitfall to be aware of, and I was also quite aware of this and tried to make sure that I didn't fall into this trap. Sometimes when we're talking to people of other traditions, we might have a tendency to find some piece of information from a book that they hold dear and say, see, you believe this, you say this. And we kind of maybe caricature their beliefs or assume that whatever is in a book written by a Sunni is the belief of all Sunnis, for instance. And the same tendency is with all different debates. If it's not through understanding and it's not for learning and trying to achieve understanding, then it's very easy to find something that you have said sometime, some text that you have written sometime that proves some sort of association or some belief or some deviance. It's probably likely if that's the lens that I'm looking and scrutinizing with, then it's very easy to then impute that false belief to the person. But this is not like that. The ahadith that I'll be sharing, these are ahadith that are widely reported, widely accepted, not only reported but accepted, that are the basis for the vast majority of Sunnis' belief in the Imam. I should say in the Imam. So I'm going to probably slip up many times. So let me just make that one distinction right off the bat, that the idea of the Mahdi being an Imam in the sense that we understand what an Imam is, that is one of the major departures between us and them. So they have the attribute of the Mahdi as an identification for this individual, but he is not Imam Mahdi. There is mention in some of the hadith, one of the ones I'll share with you, that he is the Imam of prayer, the Imam of Jama'ah. Imamukum minkum is there. But it's the Imam of Jama'ah and Imam of prayer, not the Imam in the sense that we understand as a divinely appointed guide with this kind of knowledge of the prophets and infallibility and that kind of mandate. It's not understood in that sense. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one tradition I'll share with you, there are about 5 or 6 that I'll bring. This is from the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, where he quotes Rasulullah saying, لَوْ لَمْ يَبْقَ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ إِلَّا يَوْمٌ وَاحِدٌ. If there weren't but one day left of time before the world has to end, if there were nothing but one day left in time, لَبَعَثَ اللَّهُ رَجُلًا مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي يَمْلَأُهَا عَدْلًا كَمَا مُلِئَتْ جَوْرًا. Then on that day, Allah would send a man, raise a man from my progeny who would fill the earth with justice as it was filled with injustice. So there we see some similarities to traditions that we've also received about justice being a key feature, a key goal of the Mahdi, that he will create a new order and bring things back in line with how they were intended to be. And those crooked standards and backwards, upside down standards that we were talking about and asking about, those are part of justice. It's not just about imprisoning or killing and those kinds of things, but it's setting things right the way they should be. Morality, goodness should be goodness, and evil should be identified as evil. That is also a form of justice. And so this hadith also identifies this Mahdi as one of the Prophet's progeny. رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. Another tradition from the Sunan of Abi Dawood says, إِنَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ قال لا تذهب أو لا تنقضي الدنيا حتى يملك العرب رجل من أهل بيتي يواطئ اسمه اسمي. That this dunya will not end until a man from my Ahlul Bayt rules over Arabs in particular are mentioned in this particular tradition. A man from my Ahlul Bayt will rule over the Arabs, and it mentions that his name will be in line with my name. His name will be my name. Right? So that's also something that we understand from traditions of Ahlul Bayt, that his name will be the same as the name of the Prophet, his kunya the same as the kunya of the Prophet, his father also the same as the, in the hadith of the Ahlul Sunnah, his father will be also the name of the Prophet's father. That we know is different in our tradition. A third hadith also from Sunan Abi Dawood, transmitted through Salama, salamullahi alayha, قالت سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يقول المهدي من عترتي من ولد فاطمة. The Mahdi is from my progeny. That word itra comes as well. So Ahlul Bayt was mentioned, now itra from my progeny, and particularly through the line of Fatima. So it'll be a Fatimi son, a Fatimi descendant. Another tradition from the Sunan of Tirmidhi, from Ibn Mas'ud, from Rasulullah, where Rasulullah says, "Yali rajulun min ahli bayti yuwati usmuhu ismi." A man from my Ahlul Bayt will become wali, again, take power and have authority. So we have wilaya, we have malikiya, kind of rulership mentioned in different ahadith. So he'll have this, he'll have power over people, and again, his name will be my name. And then it continues. Abu Huraira mentions this: "Law lam yabqa min ad-dunya ila yawm, latawwala Allahu dhalika al-yawm hatta yali." If there's only one day left before the end of time, then Allah will extend that day long enough for him to do what he has to do, for him to be able to come to power and do, enact the changes that he has to enact. And one last one from the Sunan of Ibn Majah. Khatabana Rasulullah, this is from, it's not mentioned here, but Khatabana Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi fakana aktharu khutabihi or khutbatihi hadithan haddathanahu an ad-dajjal. So this companion is saying that the Prophet one day spoke to us in a sermon, and most of what he spoke to us about was describing the Dajjal. وَحَذَّرَنَاهُ, he warned us against him. فكان من قوله إنه لم تكن فتنة في الأرض منذ ذرأ الله ذرية آدم أعظم من فتنة الدجال. In the course of that sermon, Rasulullah says there has not been any fitna, any upheaval, any strife on earth since the time of Adam alayhi salam, greater than the fitna that will come about through Dajjal. And then he goes on and he says, وَإِمَامُهُمْ رَجُلٌ صَالِحٌ. The Imam of the believers, the Imam of the Muslims will be a righteous man. فَبَيْنَمَا إِمَامُهُمْ قَدْ تَقَدَّمَ لِيُصَلِّي بِهِمُ الصُّبْحِ. The Imam of the Muslims, when he advances to lead the Fajr prayer, إِذْ نَزَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ عِيسَى بْنُ مَرْيَمَ. At that time, Isa alayhi salam will come down. He'll be released from where he is and he'll come down. فَرَجَعَ ذَلِكَ الْإِمَامِ. That Imam who had stood forth to lead the prayer with all the Muslims behind him, he backs away because Isa has come. يَمْشِ الْقَهْقَرَى. He walks backwards. لِيَقْدُمَ عِيسَى يُصَلِّي بِالنَّاسِ. So that Isa alayhi salam can step forward and become the Imam, that he can lead the people in prayer. فَيَضَعُ عِيسَى يَدَهُ بَيْنَ كَتِفَيْهِ ثُمَّ يَقُولُ لَهُ. So Isa alayhi salam, he puts his hand on the back of this Imam and pushes him forward and says, تَقَدَّمْ فَصَلِّي فَإِنَّهَا لَكَ أُقِيمَتْ. Right, you lead the prayer because the prayer, the iqamah has been given, the prayer has been set up for you to lead, not for me to lead. So this is one of those ahadith that tells us that, first of all, the time of Isa's return will coincide with the time of the Mahdi, and the leadership structure also is that the Mahdi is at the forefront and Isa alayhi salam is following him in prayer. That part of it I don't think a Sunni would accept, because again, the Mahdi is not an Imam, and anyone other, the prophets are at the pinnacle, and the Mahdi would be someone less than him in terms of his qualities and abilities. So I don't think they would think of him as, he's leading the prayer. It's not doesn't seem like such a big deal. In the Sunni understanding of Jama'ah prayer, anyone can lead, and whoever's leading, everyone can follow. And صَلِّ خَلْفَ كُلِّ إِمَامٍ بَرًّا كَانَ أَوْ فَاجِرًا. Pray behind any Imam, whether he's righteous or profligate, it doesn't matter. If he's Imam, then you pray behind him. And that's a fabricated hadith that they attribute to Rasulullah that any Imam will do. So the fact that he leads the prayer doesn't seem to be any indication that he's the Imam, that he's something superior to Isa alayhi salam. Contrary to the one who was supposed to have led the prayer when Rasulullah was sick, that was his credential. All right, recite wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So famously, there's one historian, Ibn Khaldun. He's a 9th century historian. He has in his muqaddimah for his history, he has a section where he addresses this idea of the Mahdi and the beliefs of the Ahlul Sunnah about it, and then he calls it into question, and he finally rejects these ahadith as being weak for various reasons. So he is one person who, exceptionally out of the foremost Sunni scholars, who has rejected the Mahdi. But interestingly, as he describes it, he affirms that this is a widely, if not universally held belief amongst the Sunnah. Right? So he says, for instance, اعلم أن في المشهور بين الكافة من أهل الإسلام على ممر الأعصار أنه لا بد في آخر الزمان من ظهور رجل من أهل البيت. It's famously and kind of in a widespread way, it's accepted by all of the Muslims that necessarily, based on the prophecies of Rasulullah, at the end of time, a man from Ahlul Bayt will rise up. يؤيد الدين, who will be a support to Islam. ويظهر العدل, who will uphold justice. يتبعه المسلمون, all the Muslims will follow him. ويستولي على الممالك الإسلامية, he will establish rule over all Muslim lands. That's interesting, that only Muslim lands as opposed to the rest of the world, apparently, according to his description. ويسمى بالمهدي, and this person will be called the Mahdi. ويكون خروج الدجال وما بعده من أشراط الساعة على أثره. And the rising up of the Dajjal and the other signs of the end times will all happen following this Mahdi. وأن عيسى ينزل من بعده فيقتل الدجال أو ينزل معه فيساعده على قتله. So he acknowledges there are two different ideas. The Dajjal is this one figure. Sayyid Sulayman mentioned him as one of those signs of the end times. And there are hadith that they quote that say that it's not the Mahdi. In fact, the Dajjal will kill the Mahdi, and then Isa alayhi salam will finally kill the Dajjal. So that's one version that he also mentions. Or another report says that they'll both work together. Isa and Mahdi together will work together to kill the Dajjal. They'll defeat him. Alright, so he mentions all of this, and then he says finally, وَنَحْنُ الْآنَ نَذْكُرُ هُنَا الْأَحَادِيثَ الْوَارِدَةَ فِي هَذَا الشَّأْنِ وَمَا لِلْمُنْكِرِينَ فِيهَا مِنَ الْمَطَاعِنِ وَمَا لَهُمْ فِي إِنْكَارِهِمْ مِنَ الْمُسْتَنَدِ. And then so he says that we're going to now mention all of the arguments, all of the ahadith, the opinions of scholars, and what their evidence was, and then we're going to break that down and call into question the sanad of different ahadith, that this is weak for this reason, this is weak for that reason, this is contradictory for that, in this way, so we have to throw both out. So he goes through and he breaks down all of that evidence and finally concludes that there's no such thing as the Mahdi, and this is a belief that has no basis. Then you see that, so he's acknowledging the existence of this widespread belief amongst the Ahlul Sunnah, and then he writes this. And then throughout history we have everyone writing rebuttals against Ibn Khaldun. And so, the Sunnis themselves have come to the front and said, no, Ibn Khaldun is wrong, and his arguments are all themselves wrong arguments, unfounded arguments, and the belief is something that was always there amongst the Ahlul Sunnah, and it continues to be there amongst the Ahlul Sunnah. Alright, recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one way to think about how people believed or how people thought about the Mahdi is by going through a hadith that the Ahlul Sunnah have collected and that they read and that they also commit themselves to, that they believe in. But there are implicit ways to also extract this idea and to see that this was a universally held belief throughout the Islamic age. Not just by the Ahlul Sunnah, this then expand to all Muslims and all their different allegiances and madahib. So you see that from the earliest time you have deviant sects that are rising up, that are causing revolutions, that are rebelling and revolting, and these concepts that are central to the Mahdi are all part of it's part of their understanding of Islam. So they say, for instance, think of the Kaysaniyah. The Kaysaniyah were a group that also they claim that there's a hidden Imam. The Ismailiyah, the Ismailis, they claim that after Imam Sadiq, Ismail, his son, either he didn't die and he's in the ghaiba, or somehow this imamah has passed. But they have this idea about a ghaiba, and that becomes a fundamental part of how they have linked Imam Sadiq to their line of Ismaili imams. Even the Dawoodi Bhora now, for instance, they have an imam who's ghaib, that they still think is a ghaiba, and then the da'i is what we would consider like a na'ib, the na'ib al-imam, someone who's present, who can interact with people, but has secret interactions or dealings with their ghaib imam. Which shows us implicitly that ghaiba is something that was understood. It works its way into all of these different claims, that yes, our imam was ghaib for this time. The Waqifiyah, for instance, have the same sort of idea that the seventh imam, that he has gone into ghaiba, that he is not, he is the last imam and his successors, the eighth and ninth imams were not the successor, and a ghaiba has started with him. Actually, the idea of a ghaiba is something that it works its way into people's beliefs, which shows us that they had this belief. You don't need a hadith that says that there's a ghaiba. You see that the Muslims themselves were tying onto or attaching themselves onto this idea, and then identifying a particular leader and saying, oh, he's in the ghaiba now, that's why we don't have access to him. Even the Abbasid revolution is founded on these ideas. So the founder of the Abbasid, Abdullah Mansur, names his son Muhammad, and the title Mahdi is given to him. So he becomes Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Mahdi. Right? And trying to almost fulfill the role by design. Let me volunteer myself, and let me put myself in a position where I can be the fulfillment of the prophecies that we all know are going to happen. And the armies come also with the black flags from Khorasan, from the east. So they tap into this knowledge that people have and expectation that everyone has. All of that shows us that these things were already embedded in the Muslim way of thinking of things. Everyone's expecting a Mahdi. They're expecting that the ghaiba will happen before the Mahdi comes. One of the signs is the black flags coming from the east. And so all these things are expected, and people are acting on that. Now, what are some differences between the Sunni understanding of this Mahdi and our understanding? There are a couple of things. One is, of course, the identity. We know who the Imam is, and he's already born. And the difficulty we have in understanding his position is understanding the ghaiba. Why is it that he was born then if his duty doesn't happen until later? And why has his life been suspended, or his contact with us been suspended in this way for this amount of time? So that becomes a difficulty for us to try to understand and address. But I've already identified who the individual of the Mahdi is through the appointment of his predecessor, his father. Whereas in the Sunni tradition, he's not born yet. He will be born at the end of time, and he will live a normal life, and then he will do his role at that time. So they haven't identified who he is, and that seems to be one of the reasons why there's such a difference, that we don't have Shi'i uprising or Shi'i Mahdis in our tradition, where you have someone claiming. You and I don't claim to be the Mahdi because we already know who he is. All our concern is to try to figure out how we can support him, how we can connect with him. And that's our trouble, our challenge. But in the Sunni community, when they don't know him, but they know he will come, then that creates the possibility that maybe I could be him, maybe I could be part of his movement. And so you have throughout history these false Mahdis rising up and making these claims. It doesn't seem like from the ahadith that I've seen anyway, there's no explicit mention of the fact that he will be born later. It simply says that there will be a man from my progeny who will rise up. I think the assumption or the fact that he'll have a normal lifespan is just an implicit assumption. But the ahadith that I've seen don't say that he will be born later, just that he will rise up later. Right? So that seems to be just an assumption that's made by Sunni scholars, but doesn't seem to be from the text itself. Another difference is the lineage of the Imam, of the Mahdi. So they have a report that they attribute to Amir al-Mu'mineen, where he says that Rasulullah told him that the Imam is رجل من أهل بيت النبي من ولد الحسن بن علي يخرج في آخر الزمان. So Imam Ali, according to this tradition, is saying that the Mahdi will be from the line of Imam Hassan, a Hassani Sayyid, right? Not from the line of Imam Hussein. And interestingly, and maybe a little troublingly, so Ibn al-Qayyim, one of their scholars, he explains this and gives the wisdom behind it. He says, في كونه من ولد الحسن سر لطيف. The fact that Allah has made the Mahdi, according to their beliefs, from the progeny of Imam Hassan and not Hussein, there is a very kind of delicate and subtle secret hidden. وهو أن الحسن رضي الله تعالى عنه ترك الخلافة لله. Imam Hassan made his treaty with Muawiyah and gave up the khilafah for God's sake. فَجَعَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وُلْدِهِ مَنْ يَقُومُ بِالْخِلَافَةِ الْحَقِّ. So Allah, as a reward to Imam Hassan for giving up the khilafah for God's sake, will put the khilafah in the progeny of Al-Hassan. وهذه سنة لله or سنة الله في عباده أنه من ترك لأجله شيئا أعطاه الله. He says this taps into, or this is part of the sunnah of Allah, that anyone who sacrifices something for the sake of God, then God will give him the same thing he sacrificed. He'll replace that, in this world or the next, but in this case it's in this world. So أعطاه الله إياه أو أعطى ذريته أفضل من, or he'll give the progeny of that person, better than that. وهذا بخلاف الحسين, he says رضي الله عنه فإنه حرص عليها. Imam Hussein, on the other hand, was very eager for khilafah. He strove for it. He wanted it because he was desirous of it. وقاتل عليها فلم يظفر بها, and he fought even for it, but he didn't succeed he wanted it and he failed. And so then Allah decided not to give the khilafah of the Mahdi to his progeny, but rather to give it to Imam Hassan's. So this is a very kind of bitter analysis of the difference. One resolution of this is that from the 5th Imam on, all of our Imams are both Husseini and Hassani. So even if this was true, the claim that the Mahdi will be from the line of Hassan, it is true because all the Imams from the 5th Imam down are a convergence of the line of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, and so they're all both Hassani and Husseini. So we don't have to reject the hadith itself. It's just not giving us the whole truth, and it's maybe a smokescreen to kind of distract away from the line of Imam Hussein. Certainly we should not come back and say, no, Imam Hussein is better than Imam Hassan or something like that. That's definitely a wrong counter argument to this. We don't want to lower ourselves to this level. Another difference is that he will be a normal person, meaning he won't have the qualities that we understand an Imam to have. So he's not this Imam Mahdi as we refer to him in this position of Imamah, not just as a leader of prayers, but someone who is divinely appointed, who has the character, who has been selected and groomed for this position from his primordial existence in Alam al-Dhar, not just through some education from his father. With infallibility, with divinely inspired knowledge, ability to produce miracles if it's needed by the grace of God and through the permission of God. So they don't understand these kinds of qualities for him. These are things that they preserve only for the prophets, and anyone after Rasulullah is not capable of these kinds of things and has none of these qualities. So they quote one hadith from Rasulullah that says, Al-Mahdiyu minna ahl al-bayt yuslihuhu Allahu fi layla. The Mahdi is from my Ahlul Bayt, and Allah will reform him, kind of fix him up overnight. Prepare him for the task overnight. And so what you see Sunni commentators, when they look at this phrase, they'll say, see, this is evidence that he's just a regular old person. If Allah is doing islah of him and improving him and fixing him overnight to prepare him for his role, that means that before the islah he was fasid. He was just a regular sitting person like you and me, going about his business. Maybe he doesn't even know he's Mahdi. And then all of a sudden overnight, this changes and he's prepared for this, and now he's all of a sudden at the top of the game, and he goes and does God's work. And they seem to link this with their own understanding of the khulafa that they chose after Saqifa, and that they give allegiance to. That this was how they were as well. They were regular people and nothing special about them, and even they sin and they acknowledge the sin and they acknowledge the corruption and the wrong mistakes and the wrong belief and the deficient knowledge of Quran, and all of this is true. All of that's there, but God selected them for this purpose through how things took place during Saqifa, and this is how God works miracles and can use the most useless person for His work. So it fits into that narrative. But again, there's nothing in the text of the phrase "Yuslihuhu Allahu fi layla" that inherently means that. Even Arabs, sometimes in ahadith, you'll see someone will come into the presence of the Imam, they'll say "Aslahak Allah" as a greeting. May God improve you, may God fix you, may God make you better. There's no implication that you're fasid, that you're a fasiq, that you're evil, that you're bad, and may Allah make you better than you are because you're such a lowly person. There's no implication, there's no hidden meaning in Aslahak Allah. May Allah preserve your salah, your goodness, is a perfectly legitimate understanding of what that phrase means as a formality, Aslahak Allah. Similar to how we say Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, it's the same idea. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm off the path and every day I'm asking Allah to guide me to the path because I'm off the path. Even if I'm perfectly on the path, even Rasulullah is saying Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim on a daily basis. It's not because he's misguided that he's asking for guidance. It's perpetual guidance that we are in need of. And every moment, even if I'm on the path, I still need Allah's perpetual help to keep me on the path. And Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim makes sense to keep me there. And so the phrase Yuslihuhu Allah fi layla does not necessarily mean that, but again, because they're coming from a particular perspective that he's not ma'soom, he's not divinely appointed, no one is like the prophets, he must be a regular person. And they also have, they're always finding ways to try to justify the position of those who usurp the khilafah for themselves. So this becomes a part of that narrative to say, look, here's another case where Allah has taken a regular bloke and he's made him into his Mahdi and someone who's going to fill the earth with justice, even though he himself didn't know who he was until yesterday. Another idea you get from some of their hadith is that he'll be unwilling. When allegiance is given to him, he'll say, no, not me. يخرج رجل من أهل المدينة هاربا إلى مكة. So one report says that a man will come out of Medina and flee to Mecca. فيأتيه ناس من أهل مكة. People from Mecca will come to him. فيخرجونه وهو كاره. They'll kind of force him to come because they know for instance the bay'ah has to be given between rukn and maqam, between where Hajr al-Aswad is, the rukn al-Hajar, and Maqam Ibrahim, as they force him, they bring him there, and he's saying, no, where are you taking me? No, don't take me, I don't want to do this. فَيُبَايِعُونَهُ بَيْنَ الرُّكْنِ وَالْمَقَامِ. And they give their allegiance, almost forcing their allegiance on him in this area. So he's unaware of who he is, and even as they're giving bay'ah to him, he doesn't even want it. Right? But somehow they give it, and he develops this awareness or wherever he gets his guidance from, but he's able to then take over and establish justice from this anonymous type of a start. In terms of his role in the Dajjal's killing, like I mentioned, it's uncertain from the Sunni sources whether he is killed by the Dajjal and he's out of the picture, and then Isa comes in and kills the Dajjal, or whether they both share in that role. But in any case, he's not an infallible. He doesn't have divinely inspired guidance the way we understand our Imam to have. So there are clear differences, but I think the important thing to focus on is that the common essential belief in the fact that there will be a Mahdi, and the reform of the world, filling it with justice, that this will be the end of times, that this will be from the progeny of the Prophet, from the progeny of Lady Fatima. So those are things that are common, and they're almost universally accepted amongst the Sunnis as well. And this corroborates our own understanding of our beliefs. But alhamdulillah, we've been able to derive these beliefs from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, who've given us not only that basic kind of shell of an understanding, but something much deeper. So inshallah we can identify him and be with him and support him, and not simply be spectators who see this unfold. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah. For Shaykh Rizwan, let's please recite another loud salawat. We will have the final presentation by Maulana Sulayman. The topic is Sun Behind the Clouds, the Imam's hidden role as God's vicegerent. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we are coming towards the end of this symposium, inshallah. I will slightly shorten my concluding remarks so we have more time for your questions. So please remember and prepare your questions, inshallah. We'll try to also answer as concisely as possible to allow as much time and as much benefit as possible. In this presentation, I want to discuss the very important and the very common question of what is the benefit of the Imam if he is in concealment or occultation. He's not there answering questions. He's not implementing the Sharia. He's not there as the public face of Islam. So what is the benefit? What is the point of an imamat that people might think is invisible? It's a common question that sometimes people who do believe in the imam ask in humility and sincerity, and sometimes people who may not believe in the imam may act with some condescension or perhaps with some dubiousness. And I'm sure all of you have heard of the hadith. This is narrated from our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. It's also narrated from several of our imams, including from Imam Mahdi alayhi salam himself. In answer to a question posed by one of our prominent Shia muhaddithin and scholars, Ishaq ibn Yaqub, it is reported that Imam says, "Amma wajhul intifa'i fi ghaibati," the way in which people benefit from me in my concealment, فكالانتفاع بالشمس إذا غيبتها عن الأبصار الصحاب. It's as people benefit from the sun when it is hidden by the clouds. Now, that is on one level a very easy to understand comparison, because the benefit of the sun does not depend on being visible. In fact, especially if you live in a tropical climate, sometimes you benefit more from the sun when there is some shade or some clouds. In fact, even in the time of the Prophet, sometimes people, they would delay Salatul Dhuhr because it's right at the peak of the heat in order to be able to concentrate and think about what they're praying without feeling like their body is being boiled under the sun. So on one level we can understand it. You still benefit from the sun when it's not visible, and in some ways you benefit more when there is a little bit of a shade. But ulama have mentioned that this hadith is much deeper than just a comparison of the light or the warmth that we get from the sun. Sheikh Jawadi Amali, for example, he says, think of the role of the sun in our solar system and for the earth on an existential level, before you think of some of the benefits that we get for light and for agriculture. If the sun goes behind a cloud, would you say, well, I guess there's no point. It might as well not exist. And then what happens all of a sudden? We spiral out of orbit, the solar system ceases to exist. It would be foolish for a person to think that. And related to that, it's not that when the sun goes behind a cloud, its light is reduced. We think that because we are behind the cloud. We are curtained. But if you just rise up a little bit above the horizon, the sun is shining just as much when there is shade as when there isn't. The sun is shining just as much when it is night as when it is day. We're just not facing it. We're just not seeing it. And so on a very deep level, you can see that this example, it illustrates the reality of the Imam. I have that question, what's the point of the sun when it's behind the cloud? Because I'm sitting here on a little speck of dust that we call the earth, not realizing that the very existence of my planet and everything within it, and the very existence of the solar system depends on that sun that exerts gravitational force, that has heat, and that has a perfectly calibrated radiation and heat and attributes that allow life to be sustained and allow our existence and the existence of all living things, plants and animals, to thrive. And that is the reality of the Ma'asum as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So that's what we want to explore. How is the existence of the Imam important for the very existence, not of the physical universe or solar system in this comparison, but of the spiritual existence of humanity as well. The existence of the Imam is important for our outward physical reality, but even more importantly, for our religious and our spiritual reality. So the first point to bear in mind is that ghaiba as a concept, concealment or occultation, is not unique to our Muslim ummah, nor is it unique to the 12th Imam. As Shaykh Rizwan also mentioned in his talk, this belief existed and does exist in other schools of thought because it was taught by our Prophet, by Imam Ali, and by the Imams that came before Imam Mahdi. And this phenomena existed even in previous religious communities. So yes, there is a difference in the totality of the occultation of the 12th Imam, in that it is different, for example, from some of the previous examples of concealment. And there is a difference in the duration of that concealment, but not in the essence and in the reality. So one way that we can begin to understand the benefit of the Imam in concealment is to look at previous examples of concealment that existed, even if they may not have been as long, and they may have been less total or complete, but they share certain aspects. So for example, Prophet Musa was concealed. And how many concealments? 2. One was a longer concealment when he left Egypt, and one was a shorter concealment when he went for that divine appointment for 30 days, and it was extended to 40 days. Now, in this case, the longer concealment was the first one, and the shorter concealment was the latter one. But both of those concealments had a very important role as a test for Bani Israel, as a time for them to develop their sincerity. If it hadn't been for that period of waiting and that period of the concealment of God's promised Savior, then people might not have understood or valued the salvation that Prophet Musa ﷺ was offering them sufficiently. Because they were waiting for it, they were praying for it, they were fervently expecting it, and they were thinking about it, they had a better understanding, and it wasn't a perfect understanding, and we are familiar with the story of some of the ups and downs of the religious life of Bani Israel in the time of Prophet Musa, but that was an important part of their religious training, in addition to being a test of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same thing is true of Prophet Yusuf. He had a concealment, which is a ghaiba. Don't get confused by the fancy word occultation in English. It's not a normal word that we use. But ghaiba can mean a concealment, an absence, not being visible and not being present or not being recognizable, and that was there for Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam as well. And for our own Prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. So there was a form of concealment in the beginning of his mission when he had a secret invitation and da'wah for 3 years, according to narrations, and that was to prepare the groundwork and to train people and to lay the foundation for the 2 decades of preaching that would follow that. There was a concealment in Shi'b Abi Talib, a concealment when Quraysh and the Meccans boycotted the Prophet and they boycotted Banu Hashim, and that was also a test for the people and a form of protection for our Prophet. So, to summarize, these previous instances of ghaiba that we have in prophetic history, in the history of our Prophet, and for our Imams, they give us some examples and illustrations of the reasons for, and not just the reasons for, but also the benefits of that taking the divinely appointed leader away from the sights of the people for a limited time. We could add the story of Prophet Yunus to that, and in fact it was his concealment that led for the people of Nineveh to repent and eventually to be saved from God's punishment that would otherwise have come to them. Now, moving on from that point, it's also important for us to remember that even when the Imams are present, they are concealed. So, I remember that way back when before the ziyarah for Iraq became very easy in the time of Saddam, I had the opportunity to go for ziyarah, and then it was easy to meet the maraji' because few people were able to go for ziyarah. I think it was 95. And our group went to meet Sayyid Sistani, and it was a group of people, and they had an opportunity. There was some advice he gave, some du'as he gave. There was an opportunity for questions. The first question that I remember was, I have here Tawzihul Masail, can you autograph it? And he said, no, we don't have this practice of autographing, but you can give me the book, I'll write Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim in it for you. And then when people saw that, now 60 people said, I have a receipt, I have a napkin, I have a piece of paper, can I get a Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim for you? So now imagine that it's not a marja', it's not a scholar, but it's a ma'asum. We're like that person, can I get an istikhara? Can I get a dua because I get frequent headaches? Can I get a dream interpreted? Oh Imam, can you have a dua that you write for me that I can keep in my pocket and so I don't get bitten by a snake or bitten by a scorpion? The Imams are in concealment and in a form of ghaiba even when the Imam is standing right in front of you, because you don't recognize what the Imam represents. And so I ask a foolish question just because I don't have an understanding of what I should want and what I should ask from the Imam. So when you understand this, then it goes a long way for us to understand that this concealment is not really that different on one level from when the ma'asum is standing there in front of you. In many ways, many people, even who loved Ahlul Bayt, and even who believed them to be imams and followed them, were as concealed from the reality of the imam as somebody who is not able to access the imam. And by the same token, there might have been somebody who was far away from the imam in Khurasan, who never met the imam, never had the health or the wealth to be able to travel, but had ma'rifah of the imam and was able to benefit from them. So even when the imam is present, even when Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam or Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam is walking the streets of Medina, and somebody in the city can say, yes, that's where the imam lives. He just passed by this way. And people are talking and asking them questions. On one level, the imam is concealed even then. Now, there is a role of the imam in God's creation that doesn't depend on the visibility and the recognition of the imam. As we compared earlier, according to numerous ahadith, just like the sun, its role in existence does not depend on whether you can see the sun. You can't see the sun at night, but it's still exerting its influence on everything on earth, from the tides to the existence of plants and animals to its gravitational force and so on. What are some of those roles of the imam in God's creation? One is that blessings come to all people from the presence of the imam, from the prayers of the imam, from the worship of the imam. And to understand that, we have numerous ahadith that tell us that when a believer engages in worship, not only does that benefit that believer, but actually it is a source of blessings for society as a whole. In one hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, it is narrated that if it were not for those people who have mutual love and affection for the sake of Allah, and who keep the masajid of Allah, the houses of worship, thriving, and who seek repentance at the time of dawn, لَأَنزَلْتُ عَذَابِي, Allah would have sent down His punishment for all of humanity. And another similar hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, it is said that there are times when Allah looks at the crimes committed by humanity. Think of the genocide that we are witnessing in front of the complacency of most of the world. And there are times when Allah looks down at humanity and He says that they are worthy of having a universal punishment. لا يهم بعذاب أهل الأرض جميعا حتى لا يريد أن يحاشي منهم أحدا. Allah says that nobody should be saved from this punishment because of the sins that they commit. And then Allah looks فَإِذَا نَظَرَ إِلَى الشِّيبِ نَاقِلِي أَقْدَامِهِمْ إِلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ. Allah looks at old people in ill health and infirm, and they're not even able to walk easily, but they are with difficulty conveying their feet to the masjid so they can attend the prayer. وَالْوِلْدَانِ يَتَعَلَّمُونَ الْقُرْآنِ. And then Allah looks at the young children. They don't have any worldly power or wealth or influence or any kind of political influence, but they're innocent and they are learning the Quran. And then when Allah sees that, those with influence and power, the people who impress us, and we might consider to be our role models and think that they give us some benefit because they might give us a job or they might give us profit or they might help us reach our goals. They are the ones that are the reason why Allah wants to punish everybody in the earth. But those innocents or those who are old and infirm and without worldly power due to their sincerity, Allah looks at them, رَحِمَهُمْ وَأَخَّرَ عَنْهُمْ ذَلِكَ. Allah gives grace to us who are strong but sinful through those who are weak but sincere. Now, that is elderly believers who worship Allah and young innocent children who are learning the Quran. So imagine if you have a ma'asum who is alive and present and whose worship is better than elderly believers, no matter how sincere they may be, and whose knowledge and recitation of the Quran is far more significant than that of anyone learning the Quran, a new Muslim or a child. And you can understand that there is a blessing, a benefit, a protection from punishment that comes to all of humanity and all of us through the existence of the Imam. Another existential benefit of the existence of the Imam is that what do we call our Muslim community or nation? We are an ummah. And an ummah only exists because of and through an imam. Let's take a hypothetical example. This has no bearing on reality. Let's say that there's a country with a Secretary of Defense who disappears for some time. No bearing on reality, but they have to pretend that he's still there, right? Or if people discover it, then they would have to say that, well, he's delegated his authority to a deputy. Because an institution cannot exist without there being somebody at the head. And in previous kingdoms, sometimes the king would die, but the heir apparent is not quite ready. And so the advisors and the wazir would hide the death of the king for days or weeks or sometimes months until they can get things ready, because you cannot have a kingdom without a king. You cannot have an ummah without an imam. And if somebody says, well, the imam is the Quran, yes, the Quran is an imam, but the ummah is not just bound by fallible interpretations of a divine scripture. The ummah is defined by the fulfillment of the promise that Allah has given our Prophet and the religion of our Prophet, which is the complete eradication of evil and of misguidance and ignorance. And so, if the existence of the ummah depends on the imam, then that imam must always be present, and that imam must be an infallible person who can lead, and not just an infallible book but that is subject to fallible and imperfect interpretations by people like myself or you. So the existence of the ummah depends on the imam. And it's very interesting that those who reject the infallibility of the imam, they still accept infallibility. But they say that the ummah itself is infallible. لا تجتمع أمتي على خطأ. The ummah will not be united in falsehood. It's true. The ummah will not be united in falsehood. But that's kind of a meaningless statement if you just look at the ummah as an ummah. The ummah will not be united in falsehood. Why? Because there is somebody within the ummah that is always protected from falsehood. And so the fact that the ummah as a whole will not be misled is also only because of the imam. Otherwise, just to say, well, the ummah is infallible, what does that mean? And what practical effect does that have for our guidance? One problem that the ummah can solve through ijma' or consensus without the existence of the imam, you won't find any examples of that. So the imam is essential not just for the protection, but for the very existence of the ummah. But the imam does provide protection to the religion of Allah. In Nahj al-Balagha, there is a statement attributed to Imam Ali. This is in the statement, the section of short statements of Imam Ali. لا تخلو الأرض من قائم لله بحجة إما ظاهرا مشهورا. The earth will always have a divine authority, either manifest and known, وإما خائفا مغمورا, or in fear and therefore concealed. لألا تبطل حجج الله وبيناته. So Allah provides the completion of His proof. He provides guidance to people who are seeking guidance. And that guidance doesn't always have to come when you recognize the person providing that guidance. It can come from advice that you get from a scholar, or something that you read in a book, or a thought that enters into your mind. But it was the sunnah of Allah that those interventions, they are Allah's interventions, but they come through people. That's why Allah sent prophets. That's why in the story in Surah Al-Kahf of Prophet Musa meeting Khidr alayhi salam, there is a person who is providing that guidance, who is fulfilling those secret roles in humanity. The ship that was not sunk, but that was damaged. That child that died. Maybe the parents thought that it was a natural death or it was a freak accident. The wall that was saved, maybe the orphans and maybe the people of the city, they just thought that it happened to hold up well against the ravages of time. But those were God's interventions. They come through a human being. Normally it's hidden, but in His wisdom, Allah opened that curtain for Prophet Musa so he can know some of those things that even a prophet does not always appreciate, but that are not an exception, they are the rule. So if that is the character, that is the sunnah of Allah, that is the conduct of Allah, then that protection of the followers of Islam from guidance, that also comes at the hands of the imam. The existence of the imam is the manifestation of the completeness of religion. When the Quran tells us in Surah Al-Ma'idah, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. This religion is complete, nothing is lacking in it. And then if I say, all right, the religion is complete, the religion is supposed to eradicate all evil and all injustice. Okay, how? You say, well, he's not really born yet. It's kind of like me saying that, you know what, you need to get somewhere? Well, I have a car. And you're like, all right, I need to go. I'm like, well, I haven't actually built it yet. Still working on the blueprints and I'm going to test it out. But it's there. It's complete. No, it's not complete. And if you've ever worked in the engineering department of a corporation, you will not make that mistake of saying that you are complete and just have the initial drawing on paper without having anything deliberate. deliverable. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is no different in His wisdom. If He says the religion is complete and the religion is supposed to be able to vanquish evil, then from the side of Allah and His religion and religious leadership, it's all ready. The car is there, ready to go. Now, if you don't go and utilize it, then that's not on Allah, that is on you and me. But if the car doesn't exist, then that's on Allah, because He didn't provide the vehicle, the means for the attainment of what He Himself said is the completion and the purpose of this religion. So just to ensure that we have time for questions, I will list a few of the other benefits. The Imam does provide help to those in need. The Imam does pray for believers, and through his prayers, we receive blessings and forgiveness and benefits from Allah. There is a test for the believers in the concealment of the Imam, a sifting of the faithful from the unfaithful, a completion and a perfection of people's intellects. Just like sometimes a teacher has to not answer a question immediately or say, you figure it out, or take away the answer key in order for a student to learn the material well. Otherwise, if you're standing too close to the student and you're there to too quickly answer every question, then they don't develop confidence, and they don't develop experience, and then they don't develop their own potential. And sometimes, counterintuitively, the presence of a ma'soom can become an obstacle for an individual or for a society. Imagine if society takes religion for granted, then the presence of a prophet or an imam only makes it more possible for people to take them for granted. So it is better, if Allah wants to be kind to people, to remove the imam, to remove the ma'soom, so they don't become even more misguided by being distracted when the imam is present. It's much worse to commit a sin in the presence of the prophet than to do so when the prophet is not there. You can make an excuse that, well, I was negligent, and then you'll immediately fix your conduct when the prophet is there. But if you become habituated to committing that sin in the presence of the prophet, then it undoes the purpose that Allah has for sending the prophet, which is to provide an opportunity for society to become more pious. And so in some ways, it is sometimes a mercy and a kindness for Allah to deprive society for a limited period of time from the presence of the imam. And then there are certain realities that you cannot appreciate when the ma'soom is there. Just like, if you don't have those special glasses when the eclipse takes place, a solar eclipse, then if there is cloud cover and it's not too severe, but it takes away the radiance of the sun, then you might be able to gaze upon the sun and see the eclipse. But if that's not there, it becomes difficult. So the Quran describes in Surah Al-Ahqaf that a person, حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَبَلَغَ 40 سَنَةً, when a person reaches the age of 40, قال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأصلح لي في ذريتي. Why wait till you're 40 to pray for your parents? That's because you can pray for your parents before you're 40. But when you reach just a little bit past the strength of youth and you have children of your own, then it's a different prayer that you make for your parents. Because it's not just in theory they did a lot for me, it's an appreciation. As you have entered a new stage in life, that I really owe a lot more to my parents than I ever imagined or I ever thought. And so certain things, they need to be experienced. And that is true for the imam as well, maybe even more so than for our parents. So when the imam is in occultation, then it takes away some of the obvious things that the imam might do for us or that we expect from the imam, and we appreciate the reality of the role and the importance of the Imam for guidance and for creation. And if you want an illustration of that, then one of the most comprehensive and beautiful ziyarat that we have of any Imam is a ziyara al-Jami'a al-Kabira, reportedly taught by our 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Naqi al-Hadi alayhi salam. So read through that ziyarah, and that tells you the importance of the Imam for creation, the importance of the Imam for Islam. And if you read through the descriptions of the rank of the Imam, the honor of the Imam, then you will see almost none of that depends on the presence of the Imam visible to our eyes, but rather on the existence of the Imam and the presence of the Imam within God's creation. And so you appreciate that deeper meaning of the existence of the Imam, and that prepares you, insha'Allah, for his appearance and for his visible presence. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to value and appreciate the gift of wilayah and the gift of imamah and the gift of the existence of our Imam, and may Allah privilege us to witness his appearance and the triumph of his mission in every corner of the earth. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah, Maulana, once again for his health, well-being, and continued tawfiqat. Please recite a very loud salawat. We have about 20 minutes for question and answer. But before we start that, I just wanted to make some quick announcements about the rest of the day's program. So once we conclude here, we'll have Maghrib and Isha prayer, and that will be followed by dinner downstairs in the banquet hall. And we will have the Amal for the night of the 15th of Shaban afterwards at approximately 7:30. Also, tomorrow we will be having the Jashan to celebrate the birth of our 12th Imam, Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wassalam. And that program will begin at 4 p.m. and will be addressed by Hujjatul Islam Maulana Sulayman Hassan Abidi. That program will begin at 4, and as Maulana Faizi had mentioned in the last program, there is that presentation by our relief committee regarding the annual giving day, which we started a couple of years ago. The relief committee will be presenting for about 15 to 20 minutes on the projects that we have collected for, the donations, how we've helped people, and what we're trying to do. As Maulana said, a lot of times these situations need funds right away, so it's good to have some in reserve. It doesn't have to be large amounts that we can give, but if every family can try to contribute something, that would be good. So they'll give a presentation on that as well. So he did say that I have to make sure to see who's coming exactly at 4 p.m. so we can start on time and they're not speaking to an empty crowd. So I'm going to just remind you on that as well. Also, we have a program on March 1st, Friday at 8 p.m., Making an Informed Choice, Practical Guidance on Voting. This will be on the voting process, why it's important, and also to understand how to make an informed choice, how to understand, find the resources to find out about candidates, and also to dispel the myth that voting is just for certain offices. There's so many different offices and local things that we need to be involved in. We normally just think about the federal level, but locally that's even more important, and that's usually where it's harder to find information. So this will help with that because those are areas where we can actually make a much bigger difference, and that's where we need to start. Also, there is a Mahdi Youth Sisters program, so it's a Sisters Wellness and Potluck. That'll be on March 8th from 7 to 9. It's ages 14 to 25. You can look to the website and you can register there. And if you have any questions, mahdiyouth@baitililm.org. Also, the program on March 1st, there is registration. It's more just for logistics. So if you are interested, please do register for that as well. And also, I just wanted to acknowledge the sponsors of tonight's programs. So it's several families: the Ganji family, the family of Brother Mehdi Rizvi, the family of Brother Yaqut Rizvi, and the family of Brother Adil and Hina Zaidi. So for their tawfiqat, for their continued success, please recite a very loud salawat. And they requested a Surah Fatiha for the following marhumeen of their families: Muhammad Ali Kanji, Khairun Nisa Kanji, Hassan Darsi, Layla Darsi, Abdul Hamid Kanji, Mir Muhammad Ali Naqvi, Ibn Asadullah Khan Naqvi, Sayyid Abul Hassan Naqvi, Ibn Asadullah Khan Naqvi, Khanum Rabab Naqvi, Binte Asadullah Kirmani, Marzia Hassan Naqvi, Binte Sayyid Taki Hussein Razvi, and for all the marhumeen of those present and from our community, please recite a Surah Fatiha after salawat. Okay, and now we will open it up for question and answers. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Sisters, Sister Asya will take the questions there. Brothers, I will pass the mic along. And I know everyone's tired, and we still also have Amal after this, but there'll at least be food to re-energize you. But this is a blessed day and a blessed night, so please, I think we have a question over there. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. They say that when Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallah Farajah al-Sharif will appear, that a lot of people will, when they see him, he will be familiar with to a lot of people that they've seen him before. Is that true?
So yes, that is true. There are ahadith to that effect, that the concealment of the Imam is not a concealment only by supernatural means. It means that he lives among us, but is not recognized even if we may be seeing him or interacting with him, potentially even speaking with him. So there is a possibility that many of us may have actually seen the Imam. And for those who go for ziyarah, for those who go for Hajj, the Imam, according to narrations, performs Hajj every year. And it's not necessarily the case that his person is concealed, but those who are there, millions of people or thousands of people may see him without recognizing him. And many of them, they may realize that when he appears and then announces his presence, that this is a face that is familiar, a voice that is familiar, a person whom we have seen before. And that doesn't mean that he's not in occultation. It doesn't mean that he's not in ghaiba, because the ghaiba does not mean you will not see him, but that he will not be recognized. And just if I can add one point, that people may see the Imam, and it is even possible, according to many of our ulama, to see the Imam and to recognize the Imam, but nobody in the period of Al-Ghaibat al-Kubra can claim to have seen the Imam or carry a message from the Imam. So the door of saying that, you know what, I have a message from the Imam, he's still in occultation, but he's about to come and he gave me this message to give you, follow me or give me your money or whatever it may be, that door is closed. And anybody who makes that claim is a liar. But it doesn't mean that people will not see the Imam without recognizing him. And it doesn't mean that people will not see the Imam while recognizing him. That is also a possibility. Although there is some scholarly discussion about the details of how that is.
Jazakallah. Any other questions? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. My understanding is that we are to strive for ultimate worldly government of the Imam. That is one of the objectives. So based on that, is an attempt to support or to help in creation of worldly governments that are consciously or unconsciously at cross purposes with the purpose of the Imam. Is that appropriate and permitted?
So I'll give a brief answer, Shaykh, if you'd like to answer that. This is a discussion among ulama that exactly what level of authority do we have in the ghaibah of the Imam to seek the establishment of a government to prepare for or while we await the Imam. There are some ahadith that say that it is not to the interest of the believers, or it is not permissible to raise a flag of rebellion against unjust governments until the advent of the Imam. And some scholars have said that what that means is that you cannot raise a flag of rebellion in the name of the Mahdi. As sometimes, as Shaykh Rizwan also mentioned, there were movements that claimed to represent the Mahdi or to be the Mahdi. But that doesn't mean that you cannot do Amr bil Ma'ruf or Nahi anil Munkar. So the short answer to the question is that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar still applies. And if that allows you to exercise some social or political authority for a period of time or for a long period of time within a certain geographical area, then that is not something that is prohibited. But that is not the primary way in which we prepare for the advent of Imam Mahdi. It's not that, we're going to infiltrate world governments and United Nations institutions and, the World Bank and World Economic Forum, and then, we're going to pave the way for the Imam. That's what people sometimes thought when Imam Ali Rida was made the heir apparent, and he disabused them of that notion. No, this is not, you're not going to infiltrate the Abbasid government and pave the way for the advent of the Imam, nor are you going to infiltrate the United Nations or NATO and pave the way for the advent of the Imam.
I think there was another question, the sisters.
Assalamu alaikum. This question for Sayyid Sulayman. What I know, the Ashab al-Imam will be 313, and this is a really small number, and we're all ready for him. And my question is, what's our duty to be ready for Imam? Like for the Sheikh, for the young people, old people, rich, poor people, what's our duty to be really ready so we can have bigger number with him?
I think Shaykh Rizwan touched on a number of important themes in his previous talk. Yes, we do have a hadith that the initial number of followers of the Imam will be 313, but there are going to be successive groups of people that will come to the Imam. The followers of the Imam that will come after the 313, the 10,000, and then the tens of thousands who will come maybe immediately after or after a short time, they will also be at a very high level of faith and sincerity, maybe even beyond our horizon of imagination. But just like even among the companions of the Prophet who had very great levels of devotion and sincerity, there were ranks. And even among the messengers of Allah, the prophets, there are ranks. So there will be ranks among the followers of Imam Mahdi. So it doesn't mean that there's only 313 true followers and everybody else is false. No, there are 313 who are at that highest level, but there may be thousands or even millions who are at a very high level. It's just that they will come 2 hours later or 2 days later, according to their rank and their level. So what we need to do is we need to deepen our humility, our piety, what we will do for the Imam and what we will want when the Imam comes is exactly what we are doing right now. And I think Shaykh Rizwan made that point, and I just want to reiterate it. If all I care about now is making more money and watching football and having vacation. When the Imam comes, I'm not going to magically transform into somebody different. I need to care about the things that the Imam cares about. I need to be concerned with the values that the Imam has. We have a hadith that tell us, what does the Imam pray for? What is it that saddens the Imam in the world and in our own mistakes and sins and so on? What is it that gladdens the Imam? So if we align ourselves with that, if we have piety, if we have sincerity of intention, then that's what's going to draw our heart, allow us to recognize the Imam, allow us to follow the Imam. But if I think that I'll just be myself and, or maybe I'll get a black belt in martial arts, so I'll be of use to the Imam, that's not what the Imam is going to need. It might be useful, because it's one of the things that you do for the Imam, but that's not the primary thing the Imam is going to need. It's not your money, it's not your physical strength, but it is your sincerity and your devotion to his cause, your alignment with his cause.
Additional questions?
I already gave a talk on
The man? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Maulana. My question is on current affairs, what's going on in the world right now, genocide in Gaza, all over the world. Are we close to the end times? Are we close to the Imam reappearance?
Since you responded to my topic, I'll respond to your topic.
Thank you. Sure.
Are we close means like...
So Sayyid Sulayman was talking about how this is not... the signs that are given, the kind of harbingers of end times are not given to us so that we start estimating and start predicting. There is a benefit in constantly being aware and being on your guard that it could be, and if it is, then I need to be ready. Because as soon as we start thinking that it's sometime way in the future and there's no way it's going to be in my lifetime and it's somewhere way down the road, then I don't need to be ready. The same way as if I see the manifestation of the predictions in every event that takes place, I say this could be. I don't know if it is, but this is very similar to what's being predicted. I need to stay ready. I need to constantly be ready. It's similar on a global scale to our own death. A constant awareness of death being imminent. Every breath could be my last, has a transformative effect on me. Whereas if I think I'm only 40 whatever, and I'm until 70, 80 at least, so I've good 30 years, 20, 30 years ahead of me, then it's going to change my life and the way I think about my life. Versus if I realize that I may not take another breath, I may not get home tonight, I don't know how long I have, then my priorities become different. That imminence is important on the personal level, and it's important on the societal level. We always think that it could happen, it could be soon, so I need to be ready.
Was there a question in the ladies? There was, okay.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is, how can one explain scientifically to an atheist that it is humanly possible to have an extended period of life?
So this kind of fits in with Sayyid Sulayman's answer earlier to the sister. Attacking or kind of dealing with some questions head on and directly doesn't always make sense. And your premise of your question is it's an atheist. So the details of the Imam's circumstances are not the primary problem that person has. They have much more serious fundamental problems with their understanding of the world that have to be addressed first. And it doesn't make sense to jump into the middle of a whole theology and out of context try to establish and argue for that. It's like going to a Sunni and saying you're doing your wudu wrong. That's not the issue that you need to talk to a Sunni about. There's something more fundamental about guidance and imamah that needs to be addressed first. And with the atheist, the more fundamental thing is that they don't believe in God. So guide them towards God, help them to understand His importance in their life first. And then, much further down the road is the details of this belief.
Najaf. Assalamu alaikum. I just had a question. When the Imam returns, is there going to be a consensus amongst the scholars that this is the Imam? All the Ayatollahs, let's say, agree. And then let's say, what about the Sunni scholars? Are they all going to agree that this is the Imam and we should all rally behind him? Thank you.
I mean, this is something also that Shaykh Rizwan mentioned a little bit in his talk, and to build upon that, the record of previous communities is not very good in terms of recognizing the hujjah of Allah that had been promised and that they were awaiting. We hope that because we have their example that we will be better. But there will be many people who died as believers waiting for the hujjah, who may not pass the test when the hujjah comes, as has been the case in previous times of prophets and imams. So it's not going to necessarily be according to the labels and the boundaries that we have, schools of thought and religious boundaries. Those are, the reality in the hereafter may be very different from the family relations and the sectarian and religious relations that we have today. Because in the hereafter, وَأَنْ لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. You're only going to have what you strove for, not what you were born with. And as ulama have explained, the reappearance of the Imam is the beginning of Qiyamah. So the same logic applies. Not as completely and as perfectly, but وَأَنْ لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. When the hujjah comes, it's not your label or your identity card that is going to guarantee you salvation, but it is your sincerity and your heart, your sa'i, your effort. So it might be that there are people who are not known as followers of Ahlul Bayt, but when they're confronted with God's proof, they will submit. And there might be people who have that label who will not. So we can't say what the percentages are. We can't say what is in people's heart, but we know the principle that when the proof of God is conclusively completed, then it is the worthiness of the heart and the soul that determines salvation, and not whether you are a blood relative of the Prophet or somebody who claimed an identity as awaiting the promised one of your time.
Thank you. We have 4 minutes till namaz. I think there's a lot of questions still, but unfortunately I think we're going to have to stop here. But it's good that we were able to have the interactive session and to ask questions and to learn on this very important topic. Once again, for our ulama who gave such good presentations, answer our questions, and just like they said there's coming, those who came exactly at 2 o'clock or a little bit before, more, and then those who came a little later, maybe a little bit less. But salawats for everybody. Thank you. That's just to encourage people to come on time. If we can now get ready for prayer, we have about 3-4 minutes. If I can ask the brothers to help put some of the chairs away so we can make space, and then after prayer we will have dinner downstairs. Thank you.